animal abusers, family killers, village-burning warmongers, genocidal zealots, slavers, murderous gangsters, power-hungry conmen, demonic creatures of all types. Welcome to the most magical place on Earth. Today we're ranking every Disney animation villain from evil to most evil.
My favorite part of the game.
Like usual, we'll start with the baddies who managed to end up on the side of good, to varying degrees. In any case, these are the redeemed antagonists. Our pick for the most pure-hearted Disney antagonist has to be Yzma's former sidekick, Kronk. While he's far from the brightest, Kronk makes up for his lack of brains with an abundance of heart. Despite his willingness to help Yzma poison Emperor Kuzco, Kronk's conscience, if you will, kept him from finishing the job, and the two ended up ultimately becoming friends despite this hiccup. On top of being a generally pleasant guy, Kronk's life has a complete turnaround once he decides to cut ties with Yzma. He becomes a chef and a scout leader for the Junior Chipmunks, becoming a beloved friend to his entire community for his willingness to help out just about anyone with just about anything. Heck, he's even willing to give Yzma a second chance when she tricks him into thinking she's reformed, and when the truth comes out that she's been using him to scam old people, he's quick to expose the truth to his friends. Kronk's naivete earns him the Darwin Center Medal, but his big heart earns him a thumbs up as the most good of Disney's redeemed villains. We won't talk about Bruno today, but we will talk about the mistreatment he suffered by Abuela Alma. It's pretty easy to hate Alma, especially if you've ever had a rocky relationship with your own family. Distancing herself from her granddaughter for not being blessed with a gift is pretty cold on its own.
Mirabel didn't get one.
But on top of that, she's also responsible for alienating Bruno from the family, all because his gift of prophecy wasn't popular. But as mean as she can be, Alma's had to deal with no shortage of trauma in her life. She's desperate to protect the family's miracles, afraid to lose them like she lost her husband, which leads to her being pretty insensitive due to that trauma.
Look around. We must protect our family, our Encanto.
She learns her lesson in the end, making amends with Bruno and Mirabel, so we're gonna give her some leeway in light of both her trauma and her redemption. In the same vein of barely qualifying as a villain, Denahi from Brother Bear is up next. There's a surprisingly high amount of poacher villains in Disney movies, but Denahi thankfully doesn't sink as low as the majority. He doesn't kill for sport nor pleasure. The guy's just got a grudge against the bear that killed his brothers, or more accurately, the bear he thinks killed his brothers. Not knowing that his brother Kenai was turned into a bear, he hunts him down for the majority of the movie, and when he realizes the truth, he accepts Kenai for who he is.
You'll always be my little brother.
Even when he chooses to turn into a bear for the rest of his life to atone for killing Dakota's mother in a fit of rage. Aside from that, his worst deed is literally just teasing his little brother, which is nothing compared to the majority of sickos we'll be talking about today. It's hard to think of a redemption arc more iconic than that of Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. And considering how iconic this character has become in the Mickey Mouse universe, we can't help but mention him. Despite starting off as a holiday-hating jerk who'd force his workers to work through Christmas, being visited by the three ghosts of Christmas to show him how badly he's potentially screwing up his life is enough to knock some sense into him. After that, Scrooge becomes generous and compassionate, apologizing for his misdeeds and being welcomed in by the same family he mistreated earlier in the movie. Though, this is just a shower thought, but I'm not sure how ethical it is for a duck to be handing out a cooked turkey as a present. In any case, though, similarly making amends with her victims is Namari from Raya and the Last Dragon. Like nearly everyone else in the movie, Namari is extremely skeptical and deceptive, willing to do anything to get her hands on the Dragon Gem for her region of Feng. The worst thing she did was betraying Raya when they were kids, using the trust she put in her as a means of stealing the gem. As mean as this was, though, we aren't talking about a lifelong friendship or anything. They literally hadn't known each other for an hour when it happened. In the end, she ends up helping to save all of humanity from the Droon by putting the Dragon Gem back together, allowing the world to come together once again. She definitely had the potential to be more of a threat, and honestly, she would have been a more interesting character if so, but this isn't some crazy supervillain or anything. It's a kid who was brought into an untrustworthy, sketchy world full of betrayal and war. She's got some misdeeds under her belt, but she still came out of it a good person. Now, onto some of the characters who did bad things for good reasons. The aliens from Chicken Little. It's a well-known fact that a mother bear will do anything to protect her cubs, but even extraterrestrials can have some pretty strong parental instincts. While Chicken Little was totally right about the sky falling, his admittedly reasonable concern about the aliens being out to destroy their planet was actually a misunderstanding. It turns out they'd somehow lost track of their son, Kirby, and while that doesn't excuse them the multiple acts of attempted murder, torture, and terrorism they committed, it's worth noting that these guys just wanted to rescue one of their kind, and one of the most vulnerable at that. In the end, they were happy to do their best to clean up their mess and leave Earth alone once they'd retrieved their boy, showing that there wasn't any malice in those aliens.
Sorry for the whole full-scale invasion thing.
Even if there wasn't any good communication in them either. They all hated him. But we didn't. Goob is proof that dwelling on the past is one of the worst things you can do for your mental health. Losing a baseball game due to sleep deprivation, thanks Lewis, caused Goob to get beaten up severely as a result of his team's disappointment in him. This would lead to him being encouraged by some weird dude in a bowling hat, still not sure who that is, to never let go of the hatred in his heart and let it guide him to all the bitter evil he can do. Okay, Shigaraki. But despite a pretty bleak outlook on life, Goob isn't all bad. In fact, he's outright horrified by the dystopian world that comes about as a result of Doris's revolt. He ends up redeeming himself in the end, or rather Lewis ends up redeeming him. After defeating Doris, who proved to never really care about Goob anyway, Lewis tries to get him adopted into the Lewis family, and in the end, he goes back to the game that started Goob's descent into villainy, turning that L into a W, and turning that psychopath into a law-abiding citizen. At least probably.
Crossies doesn't count.
I mean, he seemed happy at the end. Hopefully he wasn't just destined to try and take over the world anyway. I guess it's debatable whether or not she counts, but Tekka's true identity doesn't make her any less of a threat. Gigantic lava demon is all you really needed to know about her to justify that description. She'd be way, way lower on our list if it weren't for the fact that she's actually the benevolent goddess Tefiti, whose heart was stolen by power-hungry treasure hunters, turning her into a shell of her former self. A shell that's on fire and really pissed off. But in her defense, I'd be pretty mad too if someone literally ripped out my heart and kept it for years, so we'll give her a pretty merciful spot on our list. From someone who lost a heart to two people who gained them, next we have Jumba and Pleakley from Lilo and Stitch. Lilo and Stitch is interesting in that while it has a lot of antagonists, it doesn't really have an outright villain, except arguably one. Sure, Jumba spends the bulk of the movie trying to kill his own creation, but in the end, he's willing to help reunite him with his family.
What exactly are we doing?
Rescue.
And even rescue Lilo from Captain Gantu, which he really didn't even have much of a reason to do. The gang all becomes family from then on, with Jumba even dressing as Santa on Christmas to surprise Lilo and Stitch. Oh yeah, Pleakley's there too. I mean, I guess he was an antagonist, but he doesn't really do anything heinous unless you count trying to protect mosquitoes.
They like me.
Off topic, but did anyone else know that he has the same voice actor as the purple almighty tallest from Invader Zim? That's not a moral thing or anything, I just thought it was neat. Alright, I get ya. I know you're waiting on this guy. Give it a rest, because we all know that Iago rightly deserves a spot in this tier. Look, I know, he was a total dirtbag at first. He didn't have any problem serving Jafar, and even though Jafar had some pretty intimidating powers, it doesn't excuse how willing Iago was to do some seriously heinous stuff under his command.
Yes, almighty evil one.
But in the Return of Jafar straight-to-video sequel, Iago actually manages to reform after realizing Jafar is, awful. It's a slow process, mind you, which thankfully allows for plenty of legendary Gilbert Gottfried rants along the way.
Buddy!
But for all of his missteps, Iago manages to save all of Aladdin's friends from certain death by execution.
Did not have to, but did.
And ultimately, he's the one who defeats Jafar by knocking his lamp into the lava. Who knew this franchise had a major redemption arc that didn't even make it into theaters? Truly, Iago has passed the Gilbert Gottfried test of redemption. Now we'll move on to the characters who don't quite fall into the full-on redemption arc category, but these villains are the sympathetic baddies. First and foremost, let's take a trip to Doofenshmirtz Evil Incorporated to talk about Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz. It's been said constantly that Doof is a surprisingly sympathetic antagonist, especially for a guy who regularly attempts to commit acts of mass brainwashing, terrorism, or just straight up acts of annoyance to take over the tri-state area.
Perfect. Now I can pee all over the tri-state area.
Thankfully for everyone, this brilliant inventor isn't actually all that evil. He's just a petty, hurting man who needs to vent to his secret agent platypus nemesis before getting beaten up and having his plans thwarted. Doof and Perry seem to genuinely enjoy each other's company, and they really do care about each other. But Doofenshmirtz's best deed is easily his role as Vanessa's father, who he cherishes and tries to give the happy, loving childhood he never had growing up. Doof isn't a good guy per se, but he isn't a bad one either. He's just a broken man who needs a web-footed friend to talk to. Next up is Amos Slade. Next in line of surprisingly many poacher villains in Disney's repertoire, Slade here stands out as one of the few who seemingly learns his lesson and becomes a better person by the end of the movie. While he isn't a nice man by any means, his worst deed is just hunting animals for sport, and sometimes doing so out of spite. That's still bad, mind you, but by the end of the movie, he's seemingly changed a lot after being rescued by Todd, who he spares afterwards despite having a pretty blatant opportunity to kill him. I imagine a lot of longtime Disney fans will be less forgiving of the next hunter, Man from Bambi. Yeah, if the fact that he doesn't even have a name isn't enough indication, Man here isn't the most complicated, fleshed out Disney villain. He's best known, and only known, really, for being the hunter who killed Bambi's mother. While there's no way he could have known the trauma he'd inflicted on the whole theater full of children, killing an animal with such a young child to care for is a pretty cruel move, so we can't give him any more leeway than this. Honestly, I wish we could give him even less. If we don't have you hooked on this video quite yet, worry not. Captain Hook is here. Peter Pan's arch nemesis is one of Disney's most beloved villains of all time, and one reason for that is the simple fact that he's such a lighthearted, small-scale threat. Even looking at Hook as an old guy seeking vengeance against a child, he's not all that bad, especially considering that Peter contributed to him losing his hand when he wasn't even doing anything but treasure hunting. Like, come on, Peter, who doesn't like treasure?
Money, money, money.
There's also that common theory that Hook is a lost boy as well, and is supported by the fact that he genuinely enjoys his tussles with Peter, being sincerely saddened when he thinks he's killed him. If you don't buy that, there's also the fact that Peter Pan's original story was about him kidnapping kids and killing them once they entered puberty. So yeah, I don't think Hook is the cut and dry villain here. Even at his worst, he's one of the few Disney villains who seems to genuinely like his allies. The worst way we could describe him is that he's a bratty little kid in an adult's body. Next up, we have the overzealous Captain Gantu from Lilo and Stitch. The main defense Gantu gets most of the time is the fact that he's just doing his job. Sure, he's hunting down Stitch with the intent to disassemble him, but that's because he's been told to do so as a result of the little guy being such a destructive threat. Just following orders isn't a be-all end-all excuse though. Gantu is still cruel and merciless, even willing to kidnap Lilo, a human child, as a snack for Stitch's trip back to their planet. Snack. Which wasn't even close to a part of his job. That would be like if you kidnapped an evil baby and gave him a puppy to snack on. You are doing your job, but that doesn't make it any less screwed up. While Gantu is a lot more outwardly mean, Pete has a longer laundry list of crimes. The reason for this is simple though, as he's basically the first Disney villain, acting as Mickey Mouse's rival in a lot of older forms of media. While he used to get up to some pretty heinous stuff, seriously, I'm pretty sure he was a Nazi spy in one of the old comics, Pete has mellowed out a lot over the years. So why is he still so low? Well, while he's a lot less evil on the whole, and in some media he's not much of an antagonist at all, Pete is still a consistent jerk no matter which iteration you're talking about. He's improved a lot, which is good, but he's got a long way to go before he can make his way off of this list. Robert Callahan, aka Yokai from Big Hero 6, was a hard character to place. In some ways, he's a character who's effectively redeemed himself since his debut. At the end of the movie, he looks sorry for his misdeeds and readily accepts his prison sentence. What's more is that in the spin-off series, he directly expresses regret over letting Tadashi die, apologizing to Hiro for his selfish negligence.
I never set out to hurt anyone.
That's all well and good, and we certainly can't blame him for being rightfully furious at Cray for putting his daughter through a dangerous test that nearly killed her. That said, he still committed some pretty large-scale acts of terrorism in his efforts for revenge, and to make matters even worse, he did let one of his most dedicated students die a death he could have easily prevented.
That was his mistake.
Callahan is a villain for sure. He's just not one who's too far gone to be redeemed. Alright, that's it, Buster. You're on thin ice. Sorry, I couldn't resist. How wild is it to go from a literal comic book movie villain to dog? Angry, jealous dog. Buster is the kind of guy who'd sooner take the people around him down 20 pegs with him than he would put any effort into improving his own situation. We feel for him being a stray dog and all, but you'd think a friend would be happy when his old buddy finds love. Instead,
it's either me or her.
Buster just shows himself to be a petty, jealous jerk who ends up losing his friends due to his overzealous determination to keep them. Talk about ironic, man. What a rough situation. Nah, but seriously, I hope he got out from under all that rubble. But enough feeling sympathy and all that other mushy stuff. It's time to get into the villains who are bad, but not quite pure evil. These villains are just plain awful. First up is Edgar, one of the more selfish villains on our list. All this devoted butler wanted was a nice chunk of his boss's inheritance. Really says a lot about his character, huh? But when he found out that Madame Adelaide was leaving everything to her cats, he plotted to get rid of them, so to speak. Trying to kill an old lady's pets is just, man, that's a whole new level of petty and mean. At least if the guy robbed a bank, he'd be hurting something a lot less vulnerable.
The police say it was a professional, masterful job.
But instead, he was as underhanded as could be, proving himself to be a greedy coward. That said, he's one of the few remaining villains who doesn't seem to be a full-on murderer, which makes him less evil by default. On top of that, it's hard to blame him for being pissed about his employer choosing to pass all of her possessions down to a bunch of cats, who, realistically, can't do much with them. From Alice in Wonderland, next up is the Queen of Hearts. Ironically, heart is precisely what this lady lacks for the most part. She does seem to hold some respect and affection for her husband, but aside from him, the people of her kingdom all look utterly sane in comparison to this childish tyrant. The slightest inconvenience to the queen is a certain death sentence, which you'd think might warrant a lower spot, right? Well, the thing about the Queen of Hearts is that while she is a selfish, greedy character, she's not exactly malicious. She's more like an entitled, bratty toddler who was never taught what the word no means. That doesn't excuse anything she does, mind you, but it does make her a lot less detestable than some of the other threats in Disney history. When it comes to Disney villains, it's hard to get more iconic than Lady Tremaine, aka the Wicked Stepmother. If you were to ask the ugly stepsisters what they thought of her, they might give a more favorable review, but as for Cinderella, she knows firsthand that Tremaine is a cruel, vicious mother figure who treats any child who isn't her favorite like the dirt beneath her shoes. She never really learns her lesson, determined to exert whatever power she can to abuse the people around her. She's one of those characters who honestly, we wish we could put way lower, but sadly the remaining characters manage to be even worse. The main villain of Tarzan, Clayton, is up next.
Have we met?
This guy's a poacher, plain and simple. You might look at him and think that he's a little less extreme of an antagonist compared to some other Disney villains, and that's true to an extent, but while the scope of his crimes aren't quite as extreme as some others, he more than makes up for that with his overall cruelty. He's willing to hurt and kill animals for no reason aside from that sweet, sweet dough.
I've got some hunting to do.
And don't go thinking people are safe from his sights either. Anyone who gets between this dude and his paycheck can easily be written off as a business expense, if you get what I mean, and written off as such. Following Clayton, we have a good old-fashioned rival, Madam Mim. Magic is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands, a sentiment we'll be seeing plenty more down the line, but while she's not the worst in that regard, Madam Mim is a cut-and-dry bad guy, or girl rather. Her hatred of all things good, paired with her desire to defeat the great wizard Merlin in a wizard's duel,
Want to fight?
make her a force to be reckoned with any way you slice it. Unlike other villains though, Madam Mim doesn't seem to have some lofty world-conquering ambition. She just seems like the type to do whatever seems fun in the moment.
I win! I win! Oh, the game's over.
That doesn't excuse her for her evil deeds, but it makes her one of the less malicious villains, which at this point on the list is worth more than it probably should be. If you're one of those wimps who only eats 47 eggs every morning, you'd better steer clear of the arrogant Gaston. Handsome, strong, loved by all of the village for pretty much no discernible reason, Gaston fits the bill of a typical Disney prince. That is, except for just one difference. He's a total jerk. He's a bully who's only decent to people to whatever extent they worship him, and if his most loyal companion Le Fou is any indication, even those on his good side aren't particularly safe from his temper. There's also the fact that Gaston is an attempted murderer who riled up the townspeople to kill the beast.
I say we kill the beast!
For no reason but fear and prejudice, proving that there are few lengths he won't go to stay in favor. Gaston was an arrogant jerk, for which we'll give him the Pride Sinner Medal, but he doesn't quite enter the territory of Disney's worst enemies. But if there's one guy who can rival his ego, it's the man who lets you live in his kingdom for free and doesn't even charge you rent. King Magnifico may have a ton of wasted potential, but he's still no doubt a villainous figure. The only thing more dangerous than an ego like Gaston's is an ego like Gaston's in the body of a king. Magnifico not only abuses his power to grant wishes to ensure that the vast majority of his people will never see theirs fulfilled.
I decide what everyone deserves.
As reasonable as that may seem, but when he finally allows himself to be corrupted by dark magic, he goes into full-on tyrant mode. This would usually be enough to place him way lower considering how he's constantly lying to his people and giving them false hope, but it's worth noting that Magnifico is established to have something of a decent reason for this. Towards the start of the movie, he reveals that he's seen firsthand how granting an extravagant wish can turn disastrous. While we're never given any more detail about this, Magnifico did want to keep his people safe to some degree.
Everything I do is to make sure that never happens again.
And only revealed himself to be a full-on villain when he allowed himself to open that cursed book, betraying his wife and kingdom alike Mike in the process. It's a shame, but Magnifico made his choice, and as a result, he's got a lot to reflect on. And for the last character who really has any sort of sympathetic traits, this tier ends with the low-down voodoo artist himself, Dr. Facilier. One of Disney's most stylish, underhanded villains, Facilier is a sleazebag street performer looking to cut a deal with people using the power of his friends on the other side. In terms of his deeds throughout the movie, Facilier is nothing but pure underhanded evil, willing to trick and manipulate anyone to get what he wants and repay his debt to the other side.
We got ourselves a deal.
But while he got himself into the mess he's in, we can't ignore the fact that at this point, Dr. Facilier basically has the threat of being dragged into hell dangling over his head, and that's a fear that would make anyone do some shady things. Still, Facilier should have quit that power-hungry magic show a long time ago because those friends on the other side were not quite so friendly if you ask us. But with that dark magic dirtbag dragged away, we're moving down further to the near pure evil villains. First up, we have the inevitable evil politician villain, Mayor Dawn Bellwether from Zootopia. While many would agree that her villain reveal came out of absolutely nowhere, you just have to remember that even the nicest, most innocent people can turn out to be pretty darn devious. Sure, Mayor Bellwether was pushed around by Lionheart a lot, but that doesn't come anywhere near giving her the justification to drug countless predators, essentially turning them into mindless zombies forced to commit heinous crimes, and being locked up indefinitely as a result. She also framed Lionheart for this, which is how she secured her position as mayor in the first place, proving her to not only be a racist, but a top-shelf political criminal as well. Yeah, and we are just getting started in this tier, people. As evil as Bellwether's scheme was, not every predator turns out to be innocent. Shere Khan from the Jungle Book rules the jungle with an iron claw, and not a hint of mercy in sight. He's so merciless that he's built up a reputation to the point where he only needs to take one look at his prey to send them running.
Then you should also know that everyone runs from Shere Khan.
Oh, and if you're a human, it's game over the moment you step into that jungle. Shere Khan prides himself on killing any human who enters his territory, and if you couldn't tell, that isn't out of any desire to protect the other animals. Not every animal needs much protection, though. Take Tamatoa, for instance, implied strongly to be one of the many creatures who tried and failed to steal the heart of Te Fiti.
The heart of Te Fiti.
Tamatoa is an old enemy of Maui. This crustaceous disco ball enjoys being shiny, shining, looking shiny, and this is more of a headcanon, standing out due to his shininess. That might not seem so bad, but you have to bear in mind just how much stuff he must have stolen to get to this point, and how many people he must have eaten without a second thought to have almost done the same to Moana. I mean, come on, dude. She was nice enough to listen to your song and everything, and this is the thanks you give her? Though if there's any villain whose love of shiny objects can rival Tamatoa's, it's Madame Medusa.
Big shiny diamond for your Auntie Medusa.
There are a lot of other humans with bigger and badder plans than Madame Medusa who really just wants to get her hands on a particularly shiny diamond that probably has some sort of mystical power attached to it. Regardless, though,
got to have the devil's eye.
She's willing to verbally abuse and endanger a young girl to achieve her goals, which automatically results in her being a pretty scummy person, one who's only saved from falling even lower by the even more impressive evil of those beneath her. For instance, if we're talking about villains who treat their kids horribly, we couldn't forget Mother Gothel. First off, this girl isn't even Rapunzel's mother. She kidnapped her at a young age after discovering her hair's healing powers, determined to use this young girl as her skincare regimen to remain youthful for all her days. She would do this by keeping Rapunzel locked in a tower indefinitely and gaslighting her whenever she tries to leave. That's seriously one of the most messed up things a Disney villain has done to their child, and to make matters worse, it's only done for the sake of her staying wrinkle-free for as long as possible.
Now I'm the bad guy.
Not thinking about the fact that she'd disintegrate the moment Rapunzel's hair was cut, even by accident. Truly, Mother did not know best here. But you could argue that she knew better than Anna when she tried to marry Hans. The favorite talking point when it comes to Disney's inconsistent twist villains, Hans initially seemed like your typical Disney prince, hitting it off with Anna instantly and being ready to marry her just as quickly. Unfortunately, his reasons were anything but pure. Hans wanted to marry into the royal family and nothing more, with his plan being to kill Elsa, then wait until Anna became the queen so he could become the king. That's actually a really dumb plan. Like, did he not think Anna would tell anyone in the meantime? Why didn't he just keep it under wraps until he finished killing Elsa? You know what? That's not important right now. He'd be placed way lower on a dumb to brilliant scale, but for now, just know that Hans is a villain worthy of a fairly unforgivable spot on our list. If you've ever heard or uttered the statement, "eat the rich," I'm sure you're familiar with Prince John from Robin Hood. Disney movies have no shortage of corrupt monarchs, and Prince John is one of the worst. He's greedy to the core and keeps a tight grip on every last piece of gold he gets his greedy little paws on, even if he has to excessively tax his own people to extort it from them.
Rob the poor to feed the rich.
He won't lift a finger to help them either. To him, mass starvation and homelessness, these are just necessary prices to pay for him to stay rich. That won't earn him anything more from us than the greed sinner medal and a much-deserved visit from Robin Hood. Landing just outside of the bottom 20, we have Doris from Meet the Robinsons. Poor Goob was desperate enough for a friend that he readily accepted a robotic bowler hat, blind to the fact that Dor 15 only wanted to use him for her ultimate goals. While all Goob wanted was vengeance on the man who ruined his life, Doris wanted complete and total anarchy, taking her whole species of rejected inventions along for the ride to attempt, and initially succeed, at world domination. While Doris is pretty evil, she is still a robot, and as such, we're not sure if she's capable of emotion or anything like that. It won't save Doris from a low place on our list, but we still think the more outwardly evil characters deserve more credit, or discredit in this case. Nearing the end of this category is King Runard, the main villain of Frozen 2. Anna and Elsa's grandfather is a scumbag who can basically be blamed for most of the conflicts in both movies. He betrayed the Northuldra tribe, waging an unjust war because of his fear of magical powers. Why was he afraid of magic, you ask? Well, simple. He didn't want people thinking he could let them defy the will of a king. Yeah, really, there's not much to say about this guy. He's dead long before the events of either movie, all because of a truly meaningless war he just had to wage. Pull the lever, Kronk! Oh wait, he's way back there. Never mind. Well, Yzma is back, and how? This old lady, this gorgeously aged specimen, is both scary and sadistic beyond all reason. She'll do anything to get ahead in life, from attempting to assassinate her admittedly douchey former boss to take over the throne, to scamming a bunch of old people to make a profit off of them, all while taking advantage of Kronk, who genuinely cared about her. Yzma is a sleazebag in every sense of the word, and if you ask us, she never deserved to be turned into such a cute little kitty. More like a mosquito or something. I imagine a lot of people would argue he should be in our lowest category, but closing out this penultimate section is the nemesis of Hercules himself, Hades. With a temper as fiery as his hairstyle.
Whoa, is my hair out?
It goes without saying that Hades isn't a guy you want to mess with. The sheer fact that he's the god of the underworld earns him a fairly easy Wrath Sinner medal, as does the fact that he ultimately plans to take over the entire universe, letting Titans run amok and do his destructive bidding. His plan is one of the most destructive of the bunch, and to make matters worse, he was more than happy to kill Hercules, a literal baby at the time, for the fact that he was foretold to get in his way. The only thing good about Hades is the fact that, as underhanded as he is, Hades is willing to compromise and strike a deal with the people around him, and surprisingly, despite being the closest to the devil we've seen so far, he actually holds true to his word. But that doesn't keep him from a seriously notorious rap sheet of crimes. From torturing his servants, to attempting infanticide, to tormenting Peter Griffin's family for years on end, and sorry, wrong James Woods role. Just know that Hades is an all-around nasty guy, and if you ever strike a deal with him, you'd better make sure you have a Bible and some Reese's Pieces on standby.
Ooh, a piece of candy. Ooh, a piece of candy.
As low down, literally, as Hades is, he's just outside of the last few villains on our list. These guys are utterly irredeemable, and they'll be getting little to no sympathy from us in our final section. At number 17, yes, really, only number 17, we have the former winner of the gold medal of evil, the Chernabog. The Chernabog is literally Satan. At least the closest Disney villains can come to such a claim, and this hedonistic sociopath will do anything necessary to give himself pleasure whenever it's needed. This leads to some unspeakably horrific atrocities, and the lack of any real motivation leads us to think that he could basically be described as the objective most evil Disney villain, but honestly, that's just way too boring of a conclusion.
Boring!
Like, don't get us wrong, Chernabog is definitely a pure evil antagonist, but we don't even know if this guy is able to process whether a deed is good or evil. If anything, this Satan stand-in seems like he just does what he wants without any concept of good or evil, and he only really does it once a year, apparently. So this time around, we're going to be giving some more credit to the villains who actually could be doing something better with their lives. When it comes to evil, it doesn't get more on the nose than the Evil Queen. The one tool she needs to achieve her dream of ruling the world is unparalleled beauty, which, as long as Snow White is around, seems to be just out of reach. So the evil queen, desperate to outdo this literal child, tricks her into taking a poison apple. Surely that'll make her look better, right? Well, no, not really. But with such petty motivations and such unforgivable actions, they did manage to earn her an even lower spot on our list than she'd otherwise have. Next, we have the iconic Nightmare Before Christmas villain, Oogie Boogie. Known as the meanest guy in Halloween Town, Oogie Boogie is an unsavory creature who spends all of his time doing his two favorite pastimes, gambling and torture. When Santa falls into his sack-clad clutches, he takes his sweet time wondering how to torment him best before ultimately taking his life, with nothing in mind but the sheer pleasure of it. When you're feared amongst a town that's literally full to the brim with nothing but monsters, that's a sure sign you're one of the nastiest villains out there. Returning after more than his fair share of humble pie, Jafar is up next. This guy is one of the most underhanded Disney villains out there, able to trick the people around him to such a degree that he manages to eventually gain the powers of a mighty genie. Seeing himself as the one pulling the strings as the Sultan's royal vizier, he wanted nothing more than to overthrow his boss, possibly marry his teenage daughter, gross, and become an unquestionable ruler. If all this weren't bad enough for you, he also routinely abuses Iago, which ironically would be his downfall once he finally did manage to return, since Iago managed to knock his lamp into a volcano from which it won't return. At least, it probably won't come back from that. I mean, there's no way he survived that, right? Right? Iago, go lock the doors. Next up, we have the sadistic Bill Sykes. This guy is your average everyday loan shark stereotype, and man does he live up to it. He'll do anything to keep the upper hand over his debtors, from torture to threats of murder. The only good trait Sykes occasionally shows is honor, as he does usually stick to whatever deals he makes with Fagin, like giving him 3 days to square away his debts. But considering how he was more than happy to take a little girl hostage in order to ensure that he'd be repaid, we can't give Sykes any more credit than this for his honesty. Honestly, we're probably being too generous as is, but the rest of these guys are just really bad. You know we're dealing with some unsavory characters when Cruella de Vil misses out on the bottom 10. With a name so on the nose you could write a whole song about how much she sucks, Cruella is a girl who wants nothing more than fashionable fur.
I worship furs!
She's so twisted that she'll skin puppies to get her fur fix. And as awful as that is, she's also cowardly enough to refuse to do her own dirty work.
I don't care how you kill the little beast, but do it!
She'll try to buy the Dalmatian pups, sure, but whenever she faces any resistance, she'll resort to hiring some help to deliver them for her, so to speak. There's no doubt that Cruella is one of the meanest, vilest, cruelest, oh, I get it now, villains in Disney history, and even though her parents are known to have been tragically killed by Dalmatians, we still aren't offering this puppy poacher anything but scorn. Oh, and the parent thing? Yeah, no, that's not a joke. Apparently that's her backstory in the live-action movie. I wish it were a joke, believe me. Just outside the bottom 10 is a sadistic sea witch, Ursula from The Little Mermaid. A very fairy godmother-esque villain, Ursula is always ready to strike a deal with the less fortunate creatures of the sea. She gives them a glimpse at their greatest dreams so long as they can fulfill the conditions she outlines, which she will then work tooth and nail to make sure they can't fulfill. While she has lofty ambitions to usurp the kingdom, it's worth noting that most of Ursula's misdeeds don't seem to be done in pursuit of that goal, not directly at least. For Ursula, causing people to suffer and crushing their dreams is more of a fun pastime, if anything. The only thing saving her from sinking even lower is the fact that she actually does seem to appreciate most of her servants, a feat most of the more nefarious Disney villains aren't really capable of. From one witch to another, Maleficent takes our number 10 spot. Maleficent has every bad characteristic we've discussed up until this point, and then some. Similar to the evil queen, she's a narcissist who wants nothing less than the adoration of the entire world and will curse any child, royal, animal, or whomever else gets in the way of that. Simply put, Maleficent is evil and proud of it, taking genuine sadistic pleasure in watching others suffer for her own amusement. Her only real redeeming quality is her care for her pet Raven, showing that even the nastiest villains can have the loyalty of their little companions. If only the deceptive Scar were smart enough to learn that lesson. Scar is many things, none of which is king, but more than anything, he's the worst brother and uncle you could ask for. Rather than being content with his place in the royal family, Scar always wanted more, which easily earns him the Envy Sinner medal. He was so jealously desperate to become king that he was willing to kill his own brother and nephew to do so.
I will be king. Stick with me.
When it worked out so that only Mufasa died, he settled for convincing Simba that his dad's death was his own fault.
And if it weren't for you, he'd still be alive.
Pressuring him to escape into exile, but not before trying to get Simba killed anyway.
Kill him.
He's a coward and a killer through and through, always willing to kill anyone who gets in the way of his pursuit of power, and never willing to take even the slightest bit of responsibility for it. This would prove to be his downfall, as his betrayal of the hyenas, who sincerely liked him and thought of him as a friend, would result in them using him as their next meal. Scar may not have been a king, but at least he was a meal fit for one. Next we have a guy who really doesn't need any more meals, Governor John Ratcliffe from Pocahontas. Just look at this dude. I'd feel bad for saying I can see why he was never the popular type, but Ratcliffe is a blatant racist. At first I thought it was one of those things you noticed as you got older, but then I realized that he literally sings the lyrics, "They're different from us, which must mean they're evil."
They're only good when dead.
Well, that's pretty blatant. So yeah, this guy's just a racist scumbag. On top of that, he has his men do all the dirty work of stealing non-existent gold from the island for him, reaching an almost impressive level of laziness worthy of the sloth center medal. He's greedy, racist, cruel, and an all-around total scumbag with nothing even adjacent to a redeeming quality to be seen. Up next, we have Shan Yu from Mulan. Having undoubtedly one of the highest kill counts in the studio's history, Shan Yu is the leader of the Huns in Mulan. He's a ruthless man of war who will kill absolutely anyone who steps in his way, all in the name of expanding his territory. He's definitely the character we have the least to say about at this point, as there's no hint of tragic backstory nor overarching motivations to speak of here, just a monstrous man who's more than happy to use war as an excuse for letting his most violent instincts be unleashed. Just outside of our bottom 5, we have Percival McLeach of the Rescuers from Down Under fame. He may be arguably the least memorable villain from Disney's Renaissance era, but that doesn't mean McLeach is any less horrific. Undoubtedly the worst of Disney's long line of poachers, Percival McLeach is a poacher who will hunt down the rarest of species to sell for huge profits. He's willing to use anyone and anything as a means to this end, from his frequently abused pet monitor lizard Joanna to Cody, a literal child who happens to know where a rare bird happens to be. Not only does he kidnap and hold him hostage, but he implies that he's willing to torture and kill him unless he spills the location of his paycheck. I mean, bird.
That bird's gonna make me rich.
Percival is so evil that at the end of the movie, he tries to have Cody mauled by crocodiles so he won't be able to tell anyone about all he's seen.
This is my idea of fun.
And thankfully gets himself washed down the waterfall instead. Honestly, I kind of think he deserved worse. Big evil can come in small packages too, at least if the world's greatest criminal mind, Professor Ratigan, is any indication. Ratigan is one of those villains who at least has the honesty to wear his evil nature on his sleeve. He takes genuine pride and joy in how awful he is, having his criminal underlings sing songs of praise for his crimes. On that note, the lyrics of said songs reveal that he's drowned widows and orphans in large numbers. But don't go thinking he's any more pleasant on screen. If you upset Ratigan at all, like say mistaking him for a rat,
I'm not a rat!
He won't hesitate to call his pet Felicia to make a quick snack of you, proving that he's both racist and willing to use his own people as livestock. Even if Felicia isn't around, direct murder isn't off the table either, shown by his abduction of Olivia and betrayal of Fidget, both of whom he was willing to leave for dead on at least one occasion. And that's not even mentioning the fact that he kidnaps a toy maker to do his bidding, using his own daughter's life as leverage in his plan to kill the Queen and take over London. You know you've got a monster on your hands when that's an afterthought. This guy's so evil, I wouldn't even be surprised if it turned out he wasn't a real professor. At number 4, we have a villain who isn't from a movie, but before you get mad, it's Bill Cipher from Gravity Falls. Come on, who doesn't love this sleazy, power-hungry Dorito man? Bill is pure evil in every sense of the word. Like the Chernabog, he's willing to commit any atrocity he can for the sheer fun of it. Unlike the Chernabog, however, Bill is an intelligent mind who seems to have more in mind than just hedonism and sadism. Bill Cipher wants to unleash sheer terror on the world and reshape it according to his own twisted visions. He also fits that classic do not strike a deal with this guy, he's not a legitimate businessman archetype, as even his occasional allies will find themselves in pretty horrific fates, like the time he possessed Dipper's body and trapped his own in a puppet. Yeah, that's another thing about Bill. He's not above using kids in his schemes, even if it means keeping them locked in a false fantasy world for all eternity to make sure his plans will be successful. Seriously, who does stuff like that? Well, funny you should ask. The Bronze Medal of Evil goes to the Coachman from Pinocchio. Pinocchio has achieved his dream of becoming a real boy, and that means he has to deal with the stuff a real boy has to, like going to school. But when that proves to be not quite Pinocchio's speed, he falls victim to the Coachman, a guy who tricks vulnerable boys into going to a place called Pleasure Island, only then to turn them into donkeys and sell them off as slaves to various buyers afterward. Now, I need you to unpack this with me real quickly. The Coachman is engaging in mass child abduction, a form of transformation that almost undoubtedly would count as some sort of unethical experiment, and worst of all, child trafficking, even if they're in donkey-shaped vessels.
I want to go home to my mama!
That's a level of pure evil few Disney villains can even hope to achieve, but we can think of two that just barely managed to outdo him. Fully in the hellfire of the runner-up spot, we have Claude Frollo with the Silver Medal of Evil. Frollo is probably the first villain who comes to most people's minds when it comes to the most evil Disney villain, or at least the most hated. He starts the movie right off as a priest who does the exact opposite of his duty as a man of God, killing a woman in cold blood and nearly killing her baby for the crime of being ugly, only backing out of it after he realizes, hey, maybe God wouldn't want me murdering an infant. As a result, he does the next worst thing by keeping Quasimodo locked in the bell tower, forever deprived of human interaction until he breaks out for himself one day. But if you thought being a child abductor, murderer, and psychological abuser it's not bad enough, well, first of all, you've got some seriously high standards for evil, and second of all, just wait until Esmeralda gets introduced. Oh boy, when Frollo realizes that this gypsy girl isn't so bad looking up close, oh yeah, he's also violently racist, by the way, he resorts to burning down the whole city to try and find her and make her his own, threatening to kill her and Quasimodo if she doesn't comply. That earns him the Lust Sinner Medal, particularly for his epic villain song, which, while it is an incredibly epic number, basically boils down to, God, why am I so thirsty? On the whole, Frollo is a sadistic incel who couldn't let go of his crush or his sense of superiority, making him an easy choice for the most evil human being in Disney history. He's one of the only villains so evil that he didn't even have a sidekick to bounce off of. Seriously, nobody wanted to be around this guy. Even God was sick of his hypocritical butt at the end of the movie, as he should have been. But while we could talk our way out of crowning the Chernabog as the most evil villain, the Horned King is the type of character who can't possibly be placed anywhere but the very lowest spot on our list. This guy, just look at him, man. I have never seen a character design that screams evil quite so loudly, but we aren't here to judge on appearances. So what's the Horned King like? Well, he has no sense of loyalty nor compassion, willing to kidnap children, elderly bards, goblins, animals, etc., and force them to do his bidding. The second they run out of use to him, though, he will kill them without hesitation, but maybe he has good intentions overall. No, like, not even close. The guy literally just wants to get his hands on the Black Cauldron so he can raise the dead and take over the earth, thus becoming a god among mortals, which he directly states is all he wants. The Horned King is a sadistic, tyrannical monster who wants nothing more or less than complete and total dominance over others, and even complete loyalty to him won't save you from being abused and ultimately betrayed by him. He's so evil, in fact, that even the Black Cauldron itself hated him, and he got sucked in by it for seemingly no direct reason in the end. What he lacks in motives and complexity, the Horned King makes up for in spades with exactly what we're judging today: pure, unrivaled evil. Evil! Today we want to find out, what if every Disney villain actually won in the end? From sympathizers to outright haters, Scar pretty much takes the cake when it comes to popular Disney villains. He was also one of the villains who came closest to victory. In fact, Scar pretty much did win, at least temporarily. He got to rule the Pride Lands for a few years before Nala managed to bring Simba back to Pride Rock to reclaim the throne. But what if Scar had succeeded in preventing that outcome? Well, just looking at what happened to the kingdom while Scar was king, it's pretty clear that things would have only gotten worse. The land was already suffering a pretty serious famine thanks to the hyenas being allowed to roam freely as payment for their cooperation with Scar, and to make matters worse, he forced his own people to hunt for food to feed the hyenas while they themselves went hungry.
It's dinner time, and we ain't got no stinking entrees!
If Simba hadn't come back and dethroned Scar when he did, the famine would have progressed further until there was no food nor water for the lions. The only creatures who would have a relatively happy ending in this case would be the hyenas, who, ironically, would probably end up eating Scar anyway due to the eventual inevitable lack of food, then eating each other since there was nothing else left to eat. Next, let's talk about one of Disney's least beloved villains, the aliens from Chicken Little. These guys also fall into the category of villains who kinda did win since their motives weren't actually malicious. In fact, literally all they wanted was to find their lost child, Kirby.
Why did you take our child?
So I guess the main thing to wonder about is, what if it had taken them longer to find Kirby? Had Chicken Little not been as observant as he was, the aliens could have caused even more widespread destruction than they did. That said, they were able to undo most of the damage they did. The only reason they didn't unlobotomize Foxy Loxy was because Runt made the really creepy, in retrospect, suggestion of keeping her that way. Since the aliens were pretty chill, they'd be some of the few on this list we could root for to win, even if they could potentially cause some of the greatest destruction. Now let's talk about about the very first Disney villain, the Evil Queen from Snow White. Sure, she may not have the popularity of characters like Scar and Ursula, but the Queen makes up for it with sheer pettiness and malice. I mean, this woman's entire goal was to kill her own child's stepdaughter just because a magical mirror said she was prettier. With such a simple motive, it's not too hard to imagine how things would have turned out if she'd won. Snow White would be dead, and since the Evil Queen is, well, the Queen, it's unlikely that anyone could do anything about it. Sure, the dwarves would probably try and get some payback, but knowing how thorough the Evil Queen is, she'd almost certainly be ready for it. Arguably the darkest villain in Disney history, the Horned King made his goals very clear from the beginning. He wanted nothing more or less than to raise an army of the dead to work as his drones in complete global conquest. The scariest part of his plan was that it didn't involve life on any level. The Horned King wanted to kill every living thing on the planet and essentially rule over his own little slice of hell. If he had his way, the Earth would become a lifeless, fiery hellscape. The only not undead life that might still exist would be Creeper, and he'd probably only be around in case the Horned King needed a punching bag. It's a little tougher for us to imagine Hans winning compared to most of the villains on this list, but we'll play devil's advocate for him just this once. Let's imagine a really crazy what-if scenario. What if Hans just weren't stupid? Seriously, the guy's whole ambition was to marry into royalty. He wanted to usurp the throne, and he thought to do so by murdering the princess.
If only there was someone out there who loved you.
The princess who was in love with him anyway. Even if he succeeded in this, he'd have to kill Elsa too, who has supernatural ice powers. Alternatively, Hans could have just won by not being a murderer. He could have just forgotten about his villainous plot, appreciated the fact that a Disney princess was in love with him, and married into wealth and power. He'd live happily ever after, even if it was by underhanded means. And sure, we'd feel bad for Kristoff, but hey, Elsa's probably single, right? Next, we have the villain known for his recent work on the Switch 2's pricing committee, Prince John.
My poor wallet.
Anyway, enough lamenting. Let's talk about Chester Cheetah's cousin. Prince John had a very simple goal: cash, and lots of it. He gleefully bragged about stealing from the poor to give to the rich. If he actually succeeded in capturing Robin Hood, we don't think he'd hesitate to have him disposed of. He was pretty quick to sentence Friar Tuck to death, all for the sake of luring Robin Hood out of hiding, which tells us Prince John's pretty ruthless when it comes to reaching his goals. He really is just a spoiled child who happens to have a crown, and if he'd won, he'd only be making that more obvious by hoarding food, money, and all other resources, only giving the people just enough to live off so they could keep making him money.
The family that saves together pays together.
That said, not all hope would be lost. With Robin Hood gone, we're sure his friends and loved ones would be ready to perform a coup d'etat and usurp this corrupt cat's throne. Whether it was someone corrupt like the sheriff or someone with morals like Little John, someone could definitely take the king's throne. But even though the land would be in serious peril, Prince John wouldn't be enjoying the spoils of victory for very long. Shere Khan is about as simple as a villain can get, motivation-wise. He just wants to kill people who enter the jungle. No, like that's it, I'm serious. If Shere Khan won, then, I mean, he would have eaten a child who had no ties to the human world yet. There's no family back home in the village to avenge him, so the most comeuppance he could get would be getting his butt kicked by Baloo and Bagheera as revenge. But either way, it's hard to make a happy ending out of a kid being mauled to death by a tiger. Up next is Clayton, who had a simple motive: get rich quick, specifically by illegally selling game gorillas. While his victory would have given him some wealth, he probably wouldn't have enjoyed the spoils for long. See, if Clayton had managed to sell all the gorillas, he would still have the issue of his captives. He would either have to set Tarzan, Jane, and her dad free and contend with them, or he'd have to dispose of them. Being a skilled poacher, we're sure he could manage the latter, and he'd likely prefer to, but it'd come back to bite him. Jane and her old man are both accomplished scientists, so their absence would no doubt be a bit surprising to the community, as would the fact that Clayton just so happened to obtain several hundred gorillas and sold them immediately on his return, right after the father-daughter duo, who were very excited to meet the gorillas, just so happened to go missing without a trace. Clayton would probably be in prison for life, but hey, at least he'd be rich and in prison for life. Hope it was worth it, Clayton. There are plenty of Disney villains blinded by greed, but Edgar was a whole new level of petty. Like, you're evil enough to abandon your boss's beloved cats and kittens for money, but you're too much of a coward to make sure they don't come back? The guy was a total wuss, but if he weren't, I mean, he'd still be a wuss, but he'd certainly be a rich one. The only people who knew what he did, aside from his boss and her lawyer were animals, and this is one of the movies where they can only talk to each other, so their testimony wouldn't do much to stop Edgar. We also have a feeling that Edgar would be tormented by his conscience, since while he's not a good guy by any means, he wasn't completely heartless compared to the usual Disney villain. Up next, how about we talk about the most heartless human in Disney's history, Claude Frollo. Frollo was a total sleaze in every conceivable way. Like, honestly, I want to skip him because I don't even want to give him the satisfaction of hypothetically winning. But fine, let's say that Frollo got to live out his evil fantasies before his inevitable trip to hell. Well, for starters, Quasimodo and Esmeralda would both be dead. He'd definitely have to hire a new guy to ring the bell and would still be thirsty, but don't worry, he'd face a lot more backlash than that, most notably from the church. After the Archdeacon rightfully called out Frollo for his madness, Frollo responded by both insulting and physically assaulting this elderly man, particularly by shoving him down the stairs, which could have easily killed him if God weren't looking out for him. The sentient statue might not have killed Frollo in this alternate universe, but he'd almost certainly be demoted and probably face serious legal punishment. He'd either be in prison for the rest of his life or continue to hide from his guilt in delusions of the holiness he never had in the first place. Either way, if Frollo had won, his victory would have been one of the most short-lived in this entire roster, and then the holy statue would have sent him to hell. So basically he gets an even worse ending this way. Nice! Up next, we have the self-proclaimed adventure capitalist Commander Rourke. However, he wants to label himself, Rourke is a mercenary through and through, which means he's only concerned with missions that profit him. If he succeeded, not only would he have been ludicrously wealthy, but he'd have introduced the world to an extremely valuable source of power, capable of doing everything from advancing technology to expanding human life. While he'd no doubt be controversial, Rourke would nonetheless go down in history as the man who single-handedly increased the longevity and quality of human life. But knowing him, he'd definitely make it exclusively available to the few people rich enough to afford it. Technology would advance, but monsters like Rourke would become a dime a dozen. Another one of Disney's greediest villains is Bill Sikes from Oliver and Company. As a loan shark, Bill Sikes is just doing his job. It just happens to be a ruthless, illegal job. One of his current debtors in the movie was Fagin, and I think we need to all take a moment and thank Fagin for having a conscience, because things would have ended a lot worse if he hadn't. If Fagin didn't have a moral compass, he could have just taken the W when Sykes kidnapped Jenny to hold for ransom by her wealthy parents. That would have resulted in Sykes not getting hit by a train, for starters, but also in him getting the money Fagin owed, even if it meant traumatizing a little girl for life. We have no reason to believe Jenny's parents wouldn't pay for her freedom, and we also have no reason to believe Sykes isn't careful enough to avoid getting caught after the fact. The allegedly highly recommended Governor Ratcliffe is up next. If Ratcliffe won, he certainly would have been over the moon when he managed to eliminate the people he found in Virginia. Unfortunately for Ratcliffe, he'd be quickly disappointed by the fact that Smith was telling the truth when he said there wasn't enough gold to warrant a genocide. I mean, granted, I don't think there's any amount of gold that would warrant a genocide, but when you kill hundreds of indigenous people, you want to at least get paid for it, right? How else could he keep up that glorious figure of his? Now, I'll be honest with you guys, some of these characters had some of the outright silliest goals imaginable, to the point where imagining their victory feels absurd. Take Cruella, for instance. This woman quite literally just wanted a fur coat made out of puppy's skin. If she succeeded, she would only have so long before the police tracked her down and arrested her. Knowing Cruella, she wouldn't have wasted any time before she started showing off her new coat, and it doesn't take a master detective to think, hey, maybe the truckload of missing puppies has some sort of connection to the unstable lady who brags about her coat made of a truckload's worth of puppy fur. I'm a genius! As for another one of the lower stakes villains, Slade. Amos Slade was one who was really only a villain by proxy. He had a good heart deep down, to the point where he was willing to hunt down a fox as revenge for inadvertently causing his dog to get a broken leg. Had he succeeded, he would have killed Ted, only to immediately be arrested for breaking into a wild animal reserve and killing one of said animals. Plus, then his other dog would be mourning the death of a childhood friend. So yeah, there really wouldn't be any winning here. We're definitely glad he had the strength to end his story the way he did. Perhaps the absolute pettiest Disney villain of all was Maleficent. This woman literally devoted 16 years of her life to making sure that a girl was killed before her 16th birthday, all because she wasn't invited to that girl's christening. In her own words, fretting over Aurora was causing her to have a hard time sleeping at night. So if she'd won, if this one specific teenage girl died and stayed dead, then for some inexplicable reason, Maleficent's sleep schedule would have been fixed. I mean, good for her, I guess. Like, okay, it took you 16 years and numerous resources and sleepless nights in the meantime, but you sure did kill her. Seriously, what did you gain from this lady? Hopefully this victory would help Maleficent learn that there are better hobbies than obsessively gunning for a teenage girl. Like, anything else? Next we have Lady Tremaine, who... Look, I'm gonna be honest, I really just mentioned her because she's a memorable antagonist. She didn't really have any goals that weren't tied to her being an abusive piece of garbage. If she succeeded, Cinderella would still be sad, one of her stepdaughters would be rich, and she would continue to be rich. Truly remarkable stuff here. Let's move on to something more interesting. Mother Gothel. To be fair, she actually did succeed for the bulk of Rapunzel's life. She got 18 years of longevity from her magical hair. Had Flynn not cut Rapunzel's hair and disintegrated his would-be mother-in-law, there are two ways things could have panned out. The most likely is that Gothel would live as she always had until Rapunzel's death, keeping her locked up even more tightly than before so she wouldn't escape. But there's also a more morbid possibility. So Rapunzel's hair has healing properties, right? It kind of makes us wonder if those could be applied to Rapunzel herself. In other words, Rapunzel's lifespan could be expanded by her own magic hair, giving Gothel more time to bask in her alleged beauty and more time for poor Rapunzel to suffer. And I am really glad a lot of these villains didn't win. Holy crap. And now, without further ado, it's the man who lets you live in his kingdom for free and he doesn't even charge you rent. It's King Magnifico, the man with reasonable intentions that were absolutely destroyed by dark magic corruption. But let's say that King Magnifico succeeded in absorbing all of the wishes on Rosas and using Star as a makeshift battery. If the power of friendship hadn't saved the day, Rosas would have been screwed. Think about it, Star is pretty much the embodiment of Disney magic as a whole. With Star's magic, Magnifico's own, and the newly absorbed power of all of Rosas's wishes, he would basically be the god of his little island kingdom.
There will be no wishing on stars ever again!
Of course, with his now planet-sized ego, Magnifico wouldn't stop there. He'd take over kingdom after kingdom, garnering more and more magic along the way and refusing the people access to any of that Disney magic. Basically, if Magnifico had won, happy endings wouldn't be much of a thing in the Disney universe. Wishing on a star wouldn't be as reliable as it was for Geppetto, unless the king was making the wishes, of course. Up next, let's talk about the villainess whose beauty is rivaled by none. I'm of course talking about Yzma. Between the movie and the Kronk spin-off sequel, Yzma somehow regained most of her human traits after being turned into a cat, but let's assume that Yzma had actually succeeded in usurping Kuzco's throne. Honestly, I'm not even sure that would have been much worse. I mean, sure, Kuzco redeemed himself through his friendship with Pacha, and in a weird way, that wouldn't have happened without Yzma trying to assassinate him, but we have to wonder if Yzma would have been much worse of a ruler than Kuzco was at the beginning of the film. Don't hear us wrong, she would have been awful, and her narcissism would no doubt have led to her remaking the kingdom in her image no matter what the people thought about it. But Kuzco was literally willing to wipe out an entire village just to build himself a personal water park.
It's my birthday gift to me. I'm so happy.
It's hard to get worse than that. At worst, Yzma would be a slightly more ruthless ruler than Kuzco and a lot more openly sinister when it came to opposing her enemies. And even in that case, with Kronk around, the people would have at least some moral backbone in their leadership. Heck, I could see Kronk leading the people in a coup d'etat by complete accident, which really would be the perfect payback for old Yzma. Now, he's no Kronk, but Gaston at least tried to embody that same Giga Chad energy. Okay, first and foremost, Gaston was an idiot. I know, hot takes only here at Wicked Binge, but this dude had 3 absolute bombshells constantly thirsting for him to the point where they all cried at his would-be wedding like it was a funeral. Even with so many options, Gaston just couldn't let go of the one that got away, the one who explicitly had zero interest in him. So he'd be surprised when, after murdering the Beast, Belle would still inexplicably not be interested in marrying him. This would probably result in Gaston having a sort of if I can't have you, nobody can moment. He'd either try to kill Belle or kidnap her or some other horrid attempt at forcing her into marriage.
If you're not with us, you're against us.
And in any case, we sure hope this would open the townsfolk's eyes to how awful of a guy Gaston really was. In short, he'd probably die even if he managed to kill the Beast. The dude just didn't know when to quit. Next, we have the villain whose song just has no right to be as catchy as it is. Alameda Slim. We still aren't sure what this guy did exactly to get cow hypnotizing yodeling powers, nor are we sure what Disney was smoking when they came up with that specific superpower, but in any case, if Slim's attempt to foreclose on Patch of Heaven was a success, he'd have secured himself a ludicrous amount of farmland. Given Slim's open greed and pettiness, we doubt he'd stop until he had as many small town farms under his extra large belt as possible. Unfortunately, Slim has a lot of not super smart nephews, and it'd only be a matter of time before one of them slipped up and congratulated Uncle Slim on his newest purchase.
Howdy, Slim.
Quiet, you fools. We've got work to do.
With how high the reward for Slim would be, nobody'd waste any time turning him over to the authorities, unless the jail happened to be run by cows. Yolen wouldn't be able to save him this time. Captain Gantu is an interesting case, mostly because he just barely counts as a villain. Gantu was just doing his job after all, even if he was a little too eager about it. However, one thing's for sure, his job did not involve kidnapping a small human child. If he'd succeeded in bringing Stitch back to the Galactic Federation before he was pardoned, we have a feeling that Nani, Jumba, and Pleakley wouldn't be too far behind to stick up for Lilo and their new dog. Not only would Gantu likely be demoted for kidnapping a bystander, but the Federation would see that Stitch had no hostility towards the humans anymore, and would be pretty likely to give him the pardon he already got at the end of the film. In fact, had Gantu succeeded, he'd probably be in more trouble for both kidnapping Lilo and leading another human to the Galactic Federation headquarters. Things just don't end too well for this guy regardless, huh? While he's far from the most iconic, Percival McLeach is one of the most despicable villains in Disney history, even outdoing the villain of the first Rescuers film. Regardless, both of them were guilty of kidnapping children and forcing them to do their dirty work. Not only that, he was ruthless enough to try and feed said captive child to the alligators so he wouldn't leave behind any witnesses. Had McLeach succeeded in his plans, nobody would have any way to track him down unless he got sloppy when it came time to sell Marahute. But with how careful he was throughout most of the film, that'd be pretty unlikely. Madame Medusa may not be as evil as her sequel's villain, but she's not anywhere near innocent. It's crazy that the woman who has 2 pet crocodiles was scared of mice. Had she just been a bit more composed, she might have been able to get away with the devil's eye, and while it's unclear whether it actually has superpowers, we can only assume that Medusa would at least get ludicrously rich off of it. Of course, given her unwillingness to share the spoils with Snoops, he'd likely report her to the police as quickly as possible out of sheer pettiness, and if the devil's eye did have powers, Medusa probably wouldn't be anything more than a vessel for it. One of the literal deepest Disney villains, Ursula, is up next. Her hobby of helping poor, unfortunate souls makes her one of the most memorable, threatening antagonists in Disney's repertoire. In fact, Ursula was crafty enough to succeed momentarily, successfully trading Ariel's life for King Triton's and temporarily becoming ruler of the ocean in the process. It doesn't take a scholar to figure out where things would have gone from there. Ursula would absolutely annihilate any poor, unfortunate soul who dared speak against her. With Triton's power and her own cleverness, she'd reshape every corner of the ocean into her own image and make underwater life absolute misery for anyone who didn't pledge allegiance to her. Of course, Ursula would always be willing to strike a deal if it could benefit her personally, which would be the only way for her fellow sea creatures to make a better life for themselves under her rule. Namari is one of those villains who tragically suffers from her movie not allowing her to be fully evil. While she starts off as a treacherous, albeit not heartless, loyalist to her country, in the end, she turned out to be more good than bad. Her only real goal was whatever was best for Fang, and we assume that not being turned into stone falls into that category. Even if Namari were a full-fledged villain, she still would have had no reason to not restore the Dragon Gem, so this ending wouldn't be too different, save for the lack of reconciliation between her and Raya. Off to the next entry, the Queen of Hearts. The Queen of Hearts was... wait, did she even lose? She's still in control of Wonderland, even if she failed to execute one of the people she thought was insulting her. I guess she would have been likelier to win if she spotted the Cheshire Cat and pinpointed him as the one who was trolling her throughout the game. But even then, let's be real, the Cheshire Cat would have had her on a wild goose chase until he got bored, and the poor king would have just been along for the ride. Childish villains are one of Disney's classic tropes, and perhaps the most iconic one in that category is Captain Hook. I can't help but sympathize with Hook, at least a little bit. I mean, I'd be pretty ticked off too if some kid cut off my hand, even if I could still inexplicably play the piano really well. If Hook managed to complete his vengeance on Peter Pan, he might just be open to listening to Smee and his crew's requests to return to the open sea and continue pirating. That said, he wouldn't be entirely off the hook, because Tinkerbell would definitely want to avenge Peter, and she'd be willing to team up with that TikTok croc to ensure her vengeance was successful. Now, let's get down to business to discuss Shan Yu. Now this guy, you know what? I'll let you guys solve this one. You know that famously dark scene right after A Girl Worth Fighting For? The one where we find out that Shan Yu and his men have completely decimated an entire village for the sake of expanding territory? Yeah, just picture a whole lot more of that for anyone who wasn't willing to let the Huns take their land. And then imagine those who surrendered being murdered anyway just because Shan Yu felt like it. Next, let's talk about Hades. Villains and ruling the world go together like James Woods and Reese's Pieces, but Hades might just be the guy most determined to do it. He was willing to hire 2 of his minions to kill a baby just because he foresaw said baby throwing a wrench in his plans to rule the universe with an iron fist.
Wasn't Hercules the name of that kid we were supposed to? Oh my...
Like many of the more famous Disney villains, Hades succeeded for a little while, but had he hired more competent minions to do his bidding, he wouldn't have gotten his butt kicked by Hercules later on, since, you know, Hercules would be dead. As a result, he also wouldn't have gotten punched into the river Styx, nor would Megara have had any way to get out of serving Hades. Man, things really would have been smooth sailing if Hades just got some better employees. But when one of the guys you send to murder a baby is named Panic, what can you really expect? For every big hero 6, there's a big villain 6, and for Hiro and his gang, that villain is Yokai, a man who's admittedly one of the more kinda sympathetic antagonists on today's list. His true identity is Robert Callahan, a professor who stole Hiro's nanobot technology and used it as a means to exact revenge on Cray, the man and company responsible for stranding his daughter in space for years and nearly killing her. Though Callahan didn't even know she was still alive, he had every right to lash out, but letting his student die a preventable death wasn't okay by any means. On top of that, Callahan was only concerned with getting revenge on Cray and destroying everything he had built up over the years.
My daughter is gone because of your arrogance.
Ironically, this led to Hiro and Baymax discovering that Abigail was alive all along, just comatose and in another dimension. Ironically, if Yokai had prevailed against the heroes, he would not only have lost his chance to reunite with his daughter, but he would have prevented the one chance she had to be rescued from unconsciously floating in outer space forever. Maybe he would stay out of jail for a bit longer, but he'd live on, descending further and further into a spiral of despair, never realizing his beloved daughter was just barely out of reach. Next up, we have the world's greatest radically brilliant criminal mind, Battle Ratigan. Now, Ratigan has done a lot of evil stuff successfully. He's committed famous acts of terrorism, drowned widows and orphans, and in The Great Mouse Detective, he almost succeeds in usurping the Queen's throne and becoming the ruler of Mouse Britain. Well, in any case, if Basil and Dawson hadn't stopped him, Ratigan would be ruling over Britain to this day, or at least over the mice in Britain. Honestly though, knowing how smart and ruthless Ratigan is, we'd be surprised if he didn't cook up a scheme to start ruling humans as well.
I have the power!
There's something weirdly funny about the idea of a comically evil rodent attempting to take over human society as its ruler, but it goes from funny to terrifying when you remember that we're talking about the guy who gleefully feeds his own men to his giant pet cat if they take him off. I'm just saying, when you see a robot replica of the president giving his office to a mouse with a suit, don't say that I didn't warn you. Up next we have Dawn Bellwether. While she's far from the most popular Disney villain, understandably, Bellwether had one of the most vile plans in the studio's history. If Bellwether had her way, she would have successfully destroyed the public reputation of predators, ensuring that animals like Nick Wilde would either be drugged into murdering against their will, or forced into a life of crime to make ends meet. The rest of the animals wouldn't be in a great position by any means either. Dawn's plan caused a lot of animals to get killed, which would have given non-predators a great sense of fear around any animals stronger than themselves. Society would be thrown into speciesism like never before, and thanks to Bellwether, Zootopia would basically regress into absolute chaos. Now we have a dual entry, and one that could have caused some of the worst destruction of the bunch. Goob and Doris. While Goob just wanted to get back at Lewis for ruining his sleep schedule, and by a very long extension his life, Doris had more sinister intentions. I mean, we saw what would happen if they won. Goob would be absolutely horrified at the fact that his one and only friend was just using him to create a society where her race of helping hats enslaved all of humanity, culminating in either brainwashing or murdering Goob himself.
Doris! I thought she was my friend.
Had these two succeeded, the success would have only belonged to Doris, and the world would be reduced to a total dystopia. There are some villains in Disney who didn't have much screen time but made up for it with memorable personalities. Madame Mim is one such villain. What she lacks in screen time she makes up for in her delight in everything bad, evil, and otherwise nasty. Her whole goal in the Wizard's Duel was to prove her superiority to Merlin and his apprentice, and then, after she won, to kill Arthur. If she'd won, she would have probably gone even crazier thanks to the ego boost she got by beating her old rival, and went to conquer bigger and badder opponents. Maybe she herself would try to pull the titular sword in the stone. We'd say she could keep Arthur alive to do it for her, but come on, let's be real, she's not that smart. Up next, we have a villain who's both wholeheartedly bad and almost weirdly sympathetic. Dr. Facilier is nothing more than a sleazy con artist who's willing to ruin the lives of others in order to get ahead in life, using sleight of hand and evil genie-esque wording to trick them into deals that only hurt them in the long run. Even so, he is trying to repay some debts that could get him sent to hell. You could argue that Facilier's newfound wealth could buy his freedom, which is good.
I just need a little more time.
Because he literally got dragged to hell as a result of all of his supernatural debt. But knowing Facilier, even after he repaid his debts, this poor sinner would probably remain stuck in his old ways until the day he died. He's probably not gonna start praying at the altar. He's way more likely to get into even deeper debt to try and gamble his way to the good life, only to end up in the same boat he was in already, if not an even worse one. Finally, let's talk about the main villain of Wreck-It Ralph and one of the only twist villains Disney did right. But first, this video is brought to you by WickedBinge channel memberships. You can gain access to our videos early before anyone else, plus gain access to members-only emojis and loyalty badges by supporting the channel through a membership. King Candy, aka Turbo. Turbo cemented himself as one of the most dangerous egotists in Disney's history, and if this video has taught you anything, it should be that that is a very impressive feat. His goal was basically to ensure that he was always the most beloved, famous character in the arcade, a goal he achieved for a while by sabotaging Vanellope's code and usurping her rightful throne. If he hadn't been taken down, King Candy would have continued to rule Sugar Rush with a sugar-encrusted iron fist.
I'm now the most powerful virus in the arcade!
That is, until a new game came into the arcade. But, like, come on, what game could stand out above Sugar Rush? Sugar Rush has King Candy, man! What does that other kart racing game in the corner have? A plumber with a mustache? Some weird turtle dragon thing? Okay, yeah, like anyone's gonna want to play that.
Crushed, impaled, burned alive, splattered by trains, eaten alive, dragged to hell. You know, just Disney things. Today, we're ranking every single Disney villain fate from least gruesome to most gruesome. Now, before we get into the morbid stuff, we have to discuss the baddies who got off scot-free. First up, we have possibly the only somewhat justifiable villain here, the Hunter from Bambi. We know the legend behind him, with his fatal shot at Bambi's mother haunting multiple generations of kids. However, can we truly label this as evil in the grand sense of the film? He's hunting for food. Although Bambi's loss is tragic, it's understandable how the Hunter avoided any trouble in the end. But that can't really be said for the Queen of Hearts. The Queen of Hearts, the roller of heads in Wonderland, strikes fear into all her subjects, who try their best to appease her. When Alice stumbles into Wonderland and crosses paths with the Queen, chaos ensues as the Queen demands Alice's head. However, a single potion reveals the Queen's true colors, reducing her to a mere 2 of diamonds, cowering before Alice's newfound size. Yet, as the potion wears off, so does Alice's advantage, and the Queen returns to her former glory. But alas, it's all just a dream concocted by Alice, leaving the Queen in an unusual predicament. While she may never face justice, she also doesn't exist in reality, making her fate a curious one. But we need to talk about the Pinocchio villains. We have Gideon and Honest John, who are 2 con men who end up working for the other 2 villains, Stromboli, the cruel puppet master, and the coachman, the proprietor of Pleasure Island, a twisted land that turns naughty children into donkeys to be sold into slavery. Yeah, it's as bad as it sounds. These villains epitomize injustice, as their fates remain undisclosed in the film. The last we witness, they're still at the helm of their operations, largely unaffected by Pinocchio's actions. Pinocchio's escape is their only setback. Yeah, I think we need a sequel where these guys are dealt with John Wick style, just throwing that out there. On that note, the Headless Horseman also escapes the long arm of the law. This spectral entity, a figure of local folklore, strikes fear into Ichabod Crane, who initially doubts its existence. However, an encounter with the Horseman sends Ichabod fleeing in terror, seemingly meeting his demise at the hands, or rather the lack thereof, of the Horseman. The crucial word here is seemingly. The film never confirms Ichabod's fate, hinting that he may have found refuge with another family. While this outcome may seem foolish, it remains unconfirmed. Additionally, evidence from the original tale points to Brom Bones as the likely identity behind the Horseman, using the legend to rid himself of Ichabod's meddling. If true, this means the Horseman may merely be a tool of intimidation rather than a murderer. As the last group of villains who escape with no justice, we have Aunt Sarah and Cy and Am. Sarah showers affection solely on her nephew and her kittens, harboring a deep disdain for dogs like Lady. This antipathy provides the mischievous Cy and Am with an opportunity to wreak havoc in the house, framing Lady for their antics and prompting Sarah to cast her out with the muzzle, setting the stage for the events that follow in the movie. While Sarah's concern for the safety of the darling baby is understandable, her actions contribute to the lady's unjust treatment. Despite their mischief, neither Sarah nor the troublesome duo face any consequences and continue to reside in the household, at least in the animated version. But let's move on to the left in defeat tier. These crooks didn't get off scot-free, but generally left with their tails tucked between their legs. Starting with Le Fou. Le Fou, Gaston's loyal sidekick, doesn't face the same grand fate as his brutish boss. After a failed raid on the castle, he's simply chased back to the village. As Gaston's yes man, he merely followed orders, and his punishment seems more like a slap on the wrist. Moving on to Madame Mim.
Now don't tell me you've never heard of the marvelous Madame Mim.
After trapping Arthur in her house, Merlin steps in to challenge her to a wizard duel. Despite her cunning, she ends up catching Merlin's flu, leaving her bedridden with malignoleucomantrosis. It's not the most serious fate, just a few weeks of being sick. With proper medication, it's manageable. Merlin, being the gentleman he is, even takes her back to bed. Compared to other villains, she's got it easy. For a truly iconic Disney villain, we have Fantasia's Chernabog. In many ways, he's the big bad of the Disney universe. Chernabog is the dark, demonic figure of Bald Mountain, summoning his forces from the dead to revel in his evil, creating and distorting life just to destroy it, all while his minions cheer him on. However, when the sun rises and a group of singers emerges, singing Ave Maria and waving lanterns, Chernabog retreats into his mountain. He doesn't die, he just sulks back like the world's angstiest teenager dressed in Hot Topic apparel and slams his mountain door shut. It's okay, Chernabog, we've all been there, buddy. Penny's studio agent is now out of the picture. Despite his efforts to save the hit show Bolt, his greed-driven strategies ended in disaster. Disregarding Penny's anguish over her lost dog, he replaced Bolt with a timid substitute, leading to chaos and near tragedy. Even amidst the chaos, his mind was fixated on profits.
I'm talking cover stories, production deals, executive producer credit.
Penny's rightfully irate mom kicked him out and axed the show. Despite desperate attempts to revive it with alien plots and makeovers, even Bolt's staunchest fans remained unconvinced.
That is totally unrealistic.
With the main character gone and Bolt AWOL, the show's fate is sealed. It's a feeble bid to emulate post-movie SpongeBob. Good luck sparking nostalgia in a decade. Edgar Balthazar got a raw deal, no doubt about it. Sure, he's a villain in the classic sense, scheming to inherit Madame Bonfamille's fortune. But let's look at the facts. Madame's leaving her fortune to her cats, creatures who can't even communicate.
Cats inherit first.
From Edgar's perspective, it's like losing out to a bunch of furballs he's been tending to for ages, so getting shipped off to Timbuktu as punishment seems a bit harsh. Tick-tock, Captain Hook's time is up. This pirate's worst nightmare isn't just a noisy alarm clock, it's Tick-tock, the croc who chomped his hand off courtesy of Peter Pan. Yeah, Peter Pan is usually a good person, but he can also be a bit of a menace at times. Though, when it comes to Hook, trying to recruit kids or have them face death isn't exactly heroic. So no tears shed here for Captain Hook, now stuck dodging that relentless alligator. And if you think that's too easy, just wait to hear about the giant octopus in the sequel. Seems like the high seas aren't so friendly after all. With gators and octopi on his tail, maybe it's time for Hook to consider a career change on dry land. This guy definitely got off easy given everything he did. I mean, he smoked one of his own guys just because he was annoyed with his music. We advise you to be careful with the former royal advisor Yzma. She's even nastier than Cusco, and that's saying something, even before his whole llama fiasco.
What? A llama? He's supposed to be dead!
Fired for insubordination, she tries to poison him, then drown him when he's a llama. Enter Kronk, the hero, setting Cusco free and kickstarting Yzma's spiral. But even before that, Yzma's fate is like a cosmic joke. First, she's stuck as a cat. Then she's forced into Kronk's Squirrel Scouts. Next, she's a rabbit fleeing a condor and its hungry chicks. And the grand finale? Yzma becomes Kronk's secretary. Take a hint, Yzma, from Edgar. Throw in the towel.
Pull the lever, Kronk.
You're just digging yourself a deeper hole. Onto a classic Disney villain from the golden age of Disney, we confront the despicable Lady Tremaine, Cinderella's wicked stepmother. Before Mother Gothel, she was the original bad adoptive mom, treating poor Cinderella like a servant and doing her best to keep her down. So what's the perfect payback for such a meanie? Well, in the original movie, she pretty much gets away scot-free after losing Cinderella. But apparently she didn't learn her lesson and decided to play the villain again in Cinderella 3. This time she goes all out, stealing the fairy godmother's wand and pulling a switcheroo with Cinderella and Anastasia. Thankfully, thanks to a little help from the good guys, Anastasia rights the wrongs and Lady Tremaine ends up scrubbing floors as a maid for the king. Talk about karma. Wrapping up this section with a twist villain that everybody expects by now, it's Prince Hans. Yep, his villainy isn't exactly a twist anymore, is it? His plan? Marry Anna, dispose of Elsa, and seize power. Classic. But Anna sees through his scheme and delivers a well-deserved punch and ends up behind bars. Unlike most villains, though, he somehow wiggles out of jail, now stuck shoveling horse manure, so yeah, he may have dodged a harsher fate, but he's definitely not living the royal life anymore. Okay, next up is the jailed tier. Jail, prison, a dungeon. These villains are doing hard time. For a good old-fashioned Western villain, we have Alameda Slim. This outlaw had the misfortune of tangling with 3 bovine heroes, Maggie, Grace, and Mrs. Calloway. They put a stop to his schemes of buying Patch of Heaven with dirty money, leading to his arrest by the sheriff. A classic case of justice served. From a thieving cattle rancher to the colony invader, Ratcliffe is next. Ratcliffe, the colonial conqueror with a heart as cold as a winter frost, has a real bone to pick with Native Americans. He's all about snatching up Virginia's shiny treasures, even if it means wiping out folks like Pocahontas. But when John Smith swoops in to save the day, Ratcliffe's crew sees him for the rat he truly is. Given that Ratcliffe is going to be going in front of the king and queen and his whole crew is vouching against him, we're pretty comfortable saying he's in for a rough time. Next is Zootopia's Dawn Bellwether. The sheep in Secretary's clothing isn't as sweet as she appears. This woolly villain's been pulling the strings, trying to set up poor Nick for a fall.
Fear always works.
But our dynamic duo, Nick and Judy, pull off a sting operation that even a sly fox would admire. With blueberries in place of ammo and Carrot recording all of her nefarious deeds, Bellwether's plot unravels faster than a ball of yarn in a kitten's paws. Looks like she's traded her corner office for a jail cell. Talk about a bad day. I'm sorry. We have the most clear-cut case for this tier up next. Robin Hood's villains of Prince John, Hiss, and the Sheriff. Like kids with a new toy, they abuse their power, robbing and causing misery. They even borrowed some villainous tactics from other Disney classics, but their reign of terror comes crashing down when Robin Hood outsmarts them and restores King Richard to the throne. As Robin and his band are celebrated, the villains face justice, stripped of their titles and tossed in prison, just like they did to so many others. For some intergalactic terror, rolling in for his prison sentence is Dr. Hamsterville. Yeah, it turns out that in the first movie, you can see him in the background as a silhouette in the scene where Pleakley was talking with the Grand Councilwoman. Anyway, this hamster alien was once partnered with Jumba, and when Jumba got caught, he did too, and ended up in prison. However, it seems like the aliens treat prisons seriously, and while they're tolerant of this doctor using video calls, they do ensure that he stays in prison. While stuck in galactic prison, he was able to escape, only to get placed back there. However, in Leroy and Stitch, after his plot with all the Leroys, the council has had enough, and they decided to take him to an even more secure prison. Not only keeping Hamsterville locked up, but also all of his other Leroy copies. There are different spin-off anime shows where he breaks out and gets trapped in an even harsher prison, but listen, the Lilo and Stitch rabbit hole of lore is way bigger than you could ever imagine. Did you know there's a story where Stitch went back in time to feudal Japan and befriended a literal samurai? Yes, we're just going to stick with the official Disney movies and show. Thank you very much. It's no mistake, Robert Callahan is up next. Going by the alias of Yokai, this professor went out of his way to try and get revenge for his daughter Abigail being sent on a mission as a test pilot for teleportation technology and got lost. He faked his death and led to the actual death of Tadashi, Hiro's brother. However, Hiro was not able to only stop him, but managed to save Abigail with Baymax's help. So now Robert has his daughter back, yay! But now is in jail for a massive amount of property damage, among other things, and now everyone, even his daughter, knows how much of a deranged madman he can be. Boo! He's now stuck in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison to serve out the rest of his days without any chance of parole. It's the fact that not only were all of his bridges burned and destroyed without any chance of rebuilding them, but also having him see that his daughter was actually fine and well after all this time, thinking that she was gone from him for good, knowing now he really can't see her again, that really pushes this ranking as more mentally brutal. Our next contender, the bane of Dalmatians worldwide, is none other than Cruella de Vil. Obsessed with making a coat out of 101 spotted pups, she stooped to new lows to fulfill her twisted desires. But when her schemes unraveled, she spiraled into madness, fixating on polka dot paintings and using the dogs as living art. But the real kicker, she ended up in the loony bin, a fate few Disney villains face. Now she's stuck wrestling with her own demons and dodging Dalmatian dreams. Lesson learned, next time stick to cats, Cruella. With that said, it's time to move on to the villains who didn't survive, and we're calling this first fatal category The Fall. The Fall comes with a nice, quick, and dare I say classic death. Falling in next is Percival McLeach. This cruel hunter attempted to lure Cody into the river to be eaten by crocodiles. However, thanks to Joanna's intervention, Percival found himself in the water instead, forced to defend himself against the menacing reptiles. To his credit, he managed to fend them off with his rifle, surviving until they retreated. Realizing too late that the crocodiles were actually afraid of the waterfall, he attempted to swim to safety but tumbled over the edge. Better than being gator food, I suppose. On to Frozen 2's King Runard. Despite dying well before this movie's present day, his actions in the past set forth the plot of the movie. Thanks to the dam he created, he ended up sneakily draining the power of the Northuldras before going for the kill by betraying their leader and starting the war. Of course, he ends up dying during said war, not by any battle wound, but by falling off of a cliff. Next is the villain of the Great Mouse Detective, Ratigan. In a climactic showdown atop the clock tower, Ratigan meets his demise as the bell tolls. Stunned by the ringing, he loses his balance and plunges off, attempting to take Basil with him. However, Basil's quick thinking allows him to utilize Ratigan's own device, ultimately sparing him from the death. In his final moments, Ratigan witnesses his enemy outsmart him once more before meeting his end upon impact with the ground. Nobody falls like Gaston. Well, actually several do, hence this category, but he is up next. In a one-on-one fight against the Beast, things don't go well for Gaston. Pleading for his life, the Beast gives him a chance to crawl back to town to lick his wounds. Gaston initially accepts, but backstabs the Beast last minute. In the ensuing struggle, the Beast, thrashing in agony, causes Gaston to stumble backwards and plunge off the castle, meeting his demise in the moat below. Even if the fall didn't kill him outright, it's reasonable to assume that drowning would be imminent. Originally, there was actually a darker fate planned for him, being torn apart by the wolves the Beast had repelled earlier to save Belle. However, the filmmakers deemed this too grisly even for this movie. Still, if you're unsure about his fate, look at those skulls animated in his eyes. This guy's deader than Simba's dad. Sorry, was that too soon? Lastly, we have our first Lion King villain here, Zira. This lioness wanted to follow in Scar's footsteps and tried to get her pride of lions to go against Simba's at Pride Rock. However, with the love between Kira and Kovu bringing the two groups together, Zira's pride doesn't care for her anti-Pride Rock agenda and leaves for Simba's. Zira tries one last fight to get power back.
I'll never let it go.
And ends up almost falling, with Nala being there to save her. However, she has other plans. Pulling off a move that might earn her Hater of the Year at the Haters Ball, she chooses to plunge into a raging river. Well, the original version was edited to be less suicide-y, but that was the original idea. Pretty dark, so we'll give Zira the most gruesome spot in our fall category. But we're not totally done with the falls. These Disney villains haven't just fallen to their deaths, but had something else happen to them that made these falls all the more painful. We're calling this category the Fall Plus. Starting with Maleficent. With Prince Philip coming to kiss Aurora to wake her up, Maleficent comes out to face him head-on, alongside the powers of hell. However, the magic of the shield and sword granted by the three fairy godmothers proved to be more than enough to help him slay her and her dragon form, slamming his sword of truth right into her chest. However, she goes out trying to fall on top of him and off a cliff. Prince Philip has enough time to dodge, and when all is said and done, the only thing left is the sword of truth on top of a black cloth, which looks like Maleficent's human form if you squint your eyes a bit. From regular fire to hellfire, let's talk about Cloud Frollo. This corrupt keeper of the faith believes it is his God-given right to be the judge, jury, and executioner. I mean, the dude's spitting Bible verse like Jules from Pulp Fiction when he's swinging that sword. He tells Quasimodo he's going to plunge him into hell, to which God responds with, "No, you, lol." Enjoy that lake of fire, man. You definitely deserve it. From the hot heat of a fire to the cold embrace of the unexplored seas, Ursula's crazy sister Morgana is here to sink. Having the title of the crazy one between you and Ursula is pretty wild. After her plan, it's safe to see just why Triton decided that having someone around who wanted to be a better Ursula because of unresolved mommy issues wasn't a wise choice. As such, once he gets his trident back, Triton decides that he has had enough of her and puts all her plans on ice. Literally. She's encased in a giant ice block, only able to move her eyes around as she sinks into the cold depths of the ocean. This one just freaks me out because the depths of the ocean terrify me. Anyone else feel that way? Seriously, Google thalassophobia. No, wait, actually don't. A tale as old as time, for a death as old as time. The evil queen is here to show everyone how to die as the first Disney villain. We all know this story by now. The vain old queen wanted to be the most beautiful in all the land, so she disguised herself as an old hag and randomly offered Snow White a poison apple through her window. I know what you're thinking.
Solid plan.
Side note, Snow White, not the brightest Disney princess. I hate to say it, like, have a little situational awareness. Anyway, the seven dwarves don't take kindly to this. They chase the evil queen towards a cliff where she tries to crush them with a boulder, but a lightning strike startles her, causes the rock platform to break, and makes the old hag fall to her death. And if you're not convinced, that boulder that rolled off probably splattered her corpse entirely. Oh, and those vultures? They 100% ate her corpse. Okay, with the following categories out of the way, we now enter the Great Bodily Harm tier. These villains were vanquished from this mortal world by the use of physical violence in a variety of gruesome ways, my favorite. Want another fiery crash? Footing the bill for that is Bill Sykes. This notorious loan shark has a knack for squeezing those who can't cough up the cash. But when he tries to pull a fast one on the train tracks, karma comes barreling down the line. As Oliver and crew make their getaway, Sykes is left staring down the barrel of an oncoming train. With a scream, his car collides head-on, and let's face it, cars versus trains, spoiler alert, the trains, they always win. Starting this tier off, coming up next, we have one of the most iconic villains dying in a sequel, Jafar. Oh sure, Jafar may have survived his first adventure by being trapped inside the genie lamp, but he wasn't able to evade dying the second time around. During his final fight against Aladdin, he can only die by having his new genie lamp destroyed. If it weren't for Iago's change of heart, he may have stayed safe long enough to kill Aladdin. Fortunately, Iago did grow to care enough for Aladdin to not only bring the lamp into the picture, but to be the one to destroy it in the lava, forever casting aside his old master. It is kind of a brutal death, but we rank it lower because it also kind of frees him from his eternal itty-bitty living space. You know, frees him with the sweet release of death. That was pretty much the slogan for the pre-modern era Disney. I think that's actually etched on the Mickey Mouse statue at Disney World. Just don't quote me on that. Our next poor, unfortunate soul is Ursula. With the trident in hand, she decides to play nature's DJ, spinning up a whirlpool in the middle of a storm. But Eric is done with her BS, so he commandeers a ship, turns into a makeshift javelin, and aims it right at her. Then the lightning strikes Ursula and her trident, turning her into a seafood platter extra crispy. As shown by her clutching onto one of the ships as she slowly sinks to her watery grave, she is still alive, only truly being declared dead after sinking. Okay, we know technically he dies by falling, but Scroop is definitely an exception to the fall rule. Scroop's death is as unique as his name. Plummeting into space isn't exactly a hobby most folks enjoy. His attempt to confront Jim ends in a struggle aboard the ship with artificial gravity complicating matters. When Jim severs the lifeline, Scroop finds himself adrift in the vastness of space. While breathable, space poses numerous threats: solar radiation, debris, and the ever-present danger of black holes. Scroop's fate seems sealed, reminiscent of Arrow's tragic end. Though not confirmed, the possibility of a similar demise looms. Suffice it to say, space is no place for an exit strategy. Next up is Mulan making a manly death out of Shan Yu. She delivers Shan Yu's demise with a touch of flair, with a death as spectacular as his mustache. Drawing inspiration from amateur firework mishaps, Disney's animators decided to give Shan Yu a grand exit. Mulan traps him with his own cape, leaving him vulnerable to a fireworks blast aimed at a nearby tower, like the 4th of July, but, you know, in China. The explosion engulfs him, ensuring his defeat. Whether he perished instantly or endured a fiery end, Shan Yu's reign of terror is over. Another side note, Shan Yu is an underrated Disney villain. Doesn't say much, invades China, refuses to elaborate, blows up. That's it, that's all you need. King Candy, formerly known as Turbo, reaches the end of his arcade reign. Once the revered ruler of his game, he transformed into King Candy to bask in the spotlight. Vanellope's attempt to reclaim her place in the code unleashes chaos as bugs from Hero's Duty overrun the scene, consuming Turbo. In a twisted turn, Turbo merges with the bug, and Ralph's makeshift beacon of light spells his doom. Despite knowing it spells his end, Turbo, consumed by his bug-infested persona, hurtles toward the light, racked with both physical and mental anguish. Physical agony at a 5 out of 10, but the mental anguish is off the charts. Being aware that your body is physically embracing its own death and there's nothing you can do to stop it is a pretty dark final moment. Next, we meet Crone, a dinosaur whose memory might as well be extinct. He's all about survival of the fittest and sees Aladar's compassion as a threat to his leadership.
Good. Now, get out of the way.
Attempting to abandon Aladar to his fate and strike out on his own, Crone's stubbornness leads him to a rockslide encounter with carnivorous Carnotauruses. Even if he manages to escape being devoured immediately, his fate looks grim. In the brutal world of dinosaurs, his demise is likely inevitable, his remains left to the mercy of scavengers. Up next, Madame Medusa. Now, sure, we don't see her die on screen, but come on, take a look at her crocodiles, Brutus and Nero approaching her. That isn't a pretty picture, and she isn't looking like she'll survive it. She can't even catch up to Penny in the end. Do you really think she can strong-arm her way out of this one? It's poetic justice. Really, abuse your pets, and it'll come back to bite you. To death, maybe. And now, folks, it's time for the grand finale featuring everyone's favorite organ donor, Maestro Forte. When the Beast decides he's had enough of Forte's controlling tunes, he goes full-on keyboard warrior, ripping off the controls and setting Forte free. Forte ends up falling onto the ground, smashing and breaking upon impact, which is basically having his organs and blood spilling out until his entire body explodes. Finally, we have the mortifying murders, the excruciatingly painful, both physically and mentally. These are worst deaths imaginable. Mother knows best, and it just so happens that Mother Gothel knows one of the most dramatic ways to die. Desperate to maintain her control over Rapunzel, Gothel stabs Flynn, only allowing Rapunzel to heal him with the promise of servitude. In a noble act, Flynn cuts Rapunzel's hair, stripping Gothel of her power. Gothel's youth? Gone in a snip? She ages faster than a banana in a heat wave. Weird analogy? I don't know. And she turns into a dust bunny faster than it takes to hit the ground below the tower. Her final moments are filled with fear as she falls to her demise, Thanos style. He may not win the gold medal for most gruesome death, but Saluk's fate is still gold to us. Not podium top 3 level, but more actual gold. As a treasure hunting hothead, he's all about that bling, so naturally he goes for the Midas touch, but uh-oh, classic rookie mistake. He forgets the safe handle and goes straight for the golden handshake. Next thing you know, he's turning into a shiny golden paperweight. His screams are silenced as he becomes a lifeless golden figure, both externally and internally. On the bright side, gold never rusts. This next death has always bugged us, Oogie Boogie. A nightmarish figure who revels in torment, Oogie Boogie's cruelty surpasses the town's love for harmless scares. His sinister games of fate lead to deadly ends for his victims. However, Jack's return shifts the tide, and Oogie finds himself scrambling to escape. Jack quietly unravels him, exposing the swarm of bugs inside. Without his sack to hold him together, Oogie dissolves into the pool of lava below, or is crushed underfoot. We can't help but wonder, did he feel every squish? The thought of Oogie assimilating the bugs into his consciousness, feeling their pain as they perish, adds a gruesome layer to his fate. Finally, we get to the iconic, treacherous lion, Scar. His scheme to claim Pride Rock crumbles when Simba returns and exposes the truth about Mufasa's death. After losing the battle atop Pride Rock, Scar tries to shift blame onto the hyenas, but his plan backfires. As he falls to the ground, the impact is harsh, but what follows seals his fate. Like Gaston, Scar faces the wrath of the wildlife, this time the hyenas, who attack him, disregarding the flames engulfing them. Scar's demise is a gruesome combination of being eaten alive and cooked alive at the same time. Taking the third most gruesome death is Atlantis' own Lyle Tiberius Rourke. As the villain of this forgotten city, Rourke's greed and hunger for wealth drive him to madness. Viewing his crew as threats, he resorts to eliminating them by any means necessary, including wielding an axe against Milo. Milo, however, turns the tables by using a shard of the heart of Atlantis against Rourke, transforming him into a crystallized beast vulnerable to shattering. Despite Rourke's animalistic pursuit, Milo outsmarts him, ultimately destroying him with the blades of the blimp. In his final moments, Rourke's body and mind are shattered into thousands of crystallized pieces. That scream he lets out as he realizes his fate is actually bone-chilling. Okay, let's move on to the Horned King, who earns the second most gruesome death. Disney wanted to get darker with this movie, and regardless of the quality, you can see their efforts here, especially in the Horned King. His ambition to raise an evil army from the Black Cauldron leads to his downfall. After Taran was able to kick him back towards the Black Cauldron, the Horned King was caught within its range of power, sucking him in. Despite his trying to escape, he ends up touching the rim of the Black Cauldron and is torn apart by it. His skin is ripped off of himself, with his body soon exploding into flames, ending with him screaming in agony before getting his soul pulled into the Black Cauldron. This might be the darkest death in Disney history, well, other than our final death in this category. We cannot forget about the wildlife hunter Clayton. Yeah, this guy's death was just completely unhinged, especially for a Disney movie, and honestly, we love it. The savage hunter he is, Clayton stops at nothing to get his prey, and Tarzan is now in his crossfire. Chasing after him, he climbs his way up to the top of the trees to try and get him. However, during the chase, Clayton gets ensnared by some vines, so he starts hacking away at them to get free. The problem is that he never cuts the vine around his neck. As he keeps cutting vine after vine, the vine on his neck tightens up more and more. Tarzan tries to save him, but after one vine cut too many, he's sent plummeting down to the ground. The vine around his neck tightens as he falls, and before he can make it to the ground, snap. In case you need a clearer picture, the lightning in the background is more than happy to show the shadow of Clayton's fate, leaving us with arguably the darkest show in Disney animation history. Is it the most painful way to go? Maybe not, but come on, that imagery is the textbook definition of gruesome. But did you think we were done here? Oh, no, it gets worse. We have one last category today. These fates don't result in fatalities because there are fates worse than death. And these are those. They leave these villains in torturous states so bad, they're probably begging for that sweet release of death we talked about earlier. Let's start with Tamatoa. This crab is more than happy to show off how shiny he is and is willing to eat anyone that isn't as drab as him. Of course, the best way to pay him back is to ensure that he can't admire that shell anymore, and for that, it needs to be in a spot where he can't see it in its full glory anymore. With that, how's about having him fall down onto his back, unable to get up without any help? It may be a drab little fate, but it's more fatal in the long run. Even in the end, he can't get back up. Being stuck on his back, he's subjected to atrophy and famine as he really can't go anywhere. For a more interesting take on being imprisoned, we have the tiger of the Jungle Book, Shere Khan. In the sequel, a volcanic climax leads to his defeat as a statue topples on top of him, trapping him within the volcano. With no escape in sight, he's left to face a slow demise, deprived of food, water, and just inches away from scorching lava, or I guess magma in this case. It's a fate akin to being buried alive, and like burned alive at the same time. Moving on to the not-so-magnificent Magnifico. King Magnifico is a good guy who wants to keep the peace of Rosas, at least until he gets a taste of dark magic by corrupting wishes for his own power, gets addicted, and uses them to get more powerful. So yeah, he corrupts wishes for power, becomes addicted, and gets more powerful, but surprise, surprise, when everyone teams up to take him down, he's left playing Mirror Mirror on the dungeon wall. Despite the lack of resemblance, it's clear he's bound to become the magic mirror of Snow White. The movie could have explained this transformation better, or, could have been good, but being stuck in a mirror? That's hardly a pleasant fate. Worse than any prison cell with no access to food, water, nor Wi-Fi. It's quite the fall from grace for a ruler. The silver medal for most gruesome Disney villain fate has to go to Hades. As the god of death with a penchant for destruction, Hades has amassed his fair share of enemies. His sinister plot to bring Olympus to its knees finds him facing off against Hercules. When Hercules proves himself worthy of godhood by rescuing Meg's soul, he also returns the favor by hurling Hades into the river Styx. Surrounded by vengeful souls, Hades is dragged deeper into the abyss where escape seems impossible. These souls are all likely jumping at the chance to take their revenge on Mr. Hades, so this is likely a police officer goes to prison type of situation, mixed with a little fact that this is basically literal hell. For all we know, this is an eternal fate of torment, which we imagine is constant terror with a little bit of James Woods' wit and humor mixed in from time to time. But what would be worse than that? Well, we're going to give the gold medal for most gruesome Disney villain fate to Dr. Facilier, being dragged down to hell. Yeah, it's not a hot take to say that the other side is probably hell. After his talisman is destroyed, his shadowy allies whisk him away to their domain against his will. Despite his struggles, he's pulled into an open tiki mouth, sealed inside as a tombstone marks his screaming face. While he technically survives, his torment is far from over. Condemned to suffer at the hands of his otherworldly associates, his punishment promises to be endless and excruciating. We have to rank Dr. Facilier's death as the most gruesome fate mainly because not only is it terrifying and eternal, but it's also facilitated by Facilier's friends from the other side, who just seem to be downright nefarious. And let's be real, watching a villain get dragged kicking and screaming to hell is probably the most hardcore Disney moment we can think of.
Today we're going to look at the worst things every single Disney villain has done. And to kick things off, let's start with the characters who have lower scale misdeeds to talk about. These deeds are bad, but forgivable. We're only going with main antagonists today, so the easy winner of the least bad deed of the day is Abuela Alma from Encanto. Her worst deed, simply ostracizing Bruno. But just because she's at the bottom of the list doesn't mean we're letting her off the hook entirely. We get that Alma wanted to protect her family's miracle. What we don't get, what we really do not get, is essentially alienating her own flesh and blood from the family because people don't like the fact that his prophecies were coming true. Like, this guy lived in your walls for years, all because you didn't want him to be associated with your family image. Happy endings aside, that's gonna take a lot of family therapy to fully get over. Speaking of villains who really just needed therapy, next up is Goob, with a much more outlandish misdeed of convincing his past self to be guided by hatred. While we still hold that Goob had every right to hold a bit of a grudge against Lewis, the emphasis is still on a bit of a grudge. As in not the kind of grudge that literally guides your entire life to the point where your only friend is a sentient robotic bowler hat who plans to turn the world into a post-apocalyptic nightmare. Goob was a man who was deeply hurting, apparently never getting the help he needed for his trauma. It's possible that he just wanted his younger self to stick up for himself more, something that a little bit of anger could have helped him with, but telling his inner child that the best choice he had was to let hatred rule his life,
actions that hate be your ally,
was pretty cruel, even if the fallout was unintentional. Amos Slade is next. His worst deed was good old-fashioned poaching. If we were talking about a certain other animated Slade, he'd be a lot lower on our list, but no, this guy's just an old grouch who likes hunting. There's not really anything wrong with hunting on its own, but when you're willing to trespass on a wildlife reserve to do it, maybe your hobby has gone a bit too far. To Amos's credit though, his main reason for wanting revenge on Todd so badly was the fact that their pursuit of him caused Chief to get hit by a train, suffering a broken leg as a result. It's kind of sweet that his care for his dogs was what motivated him to so much anger, but this could have also entirely been avoided if you just let go of your grudge against a literal wild animal. Still, he spared Todd in the end and seems to have genuinely changed changed his ways, so we won't be too hard on him here. Now let's move on to perhaps the most surprisingly low placement on our list, Fantasia's Chernabog, whose worst deed was starting an unholy rave. Now, if we were to count off-screen deeds, Chernabog would be number 1 on this list without question. The guy is quite literally the closest Disney has ever come to a literal incarnation of Satan, but as for his Disney counterpart, Chernabog basically just holds a yearly rave on Halloween and forces his followers to dance furiously in worship of him before they're all sent back to hell. We have to mention him here regardless on account of, you know, he's Satan, but if the worst thing you do is throw a well-animated dance party, you won't end up any further on our list. Following Chernabog, we have one of the newest Disney villains, King Magnifico, whose worst deed, aside from absolutely wasted potential, was opening the Book of Spells. Despite essentially being the studio's attempt to return to more traditional, flashy Disney villains like Scar and Yzma, Magnifico actually seemed like one of the more reasonable villains in Disney's repertoire. Narcissistic and a bit corrupt, sure, but not a total monster. The guy just wanted to protect his kingdom from wishes that would threaten it. Unfortunately, this desire to protect Rosas ended up taking a backseat to his desire to protect his own rule over Rosas, which led him to resorting to opening a book of dark magic that turned him into a sort of discount Disney villain. Even under the book's influence, the worst thing Magnifico really does is just chain people to the ground for like 5 minutes. Tack on the fact that he's being corrupted by dark magic, and you've got a guy who feels more like a victim than a villain. Rounding out this category is Namari, whose worst deed was killing Sisu. While Namari did clearly make the deliberate choice to try and kill Sisu, we have to give her some leeway since she was obviously under duress. It's worth mentioning that this is a kid who was born and raised in a culture of war, and as a result, this clearly wasn't done out of malice, but more so out of desperation to do what her entire country was expecting her to.
I don't have any other choice.
Coupled with the fact that she did redeem herself in the end by restoring the Dragon Gem and saving the world, we think she deserves a merciful spot on the list, even if she would have been way more memorable if the movie let her be more evil. Speaking of more evil, it's time to move slowly but surely into the more despicable deeds on our list. These are the evil yet understandable deeds. First up, we have Edgar, whose worst deed was trying to abandon cats. Okay, let's just look at this one objectively. I know cats are cute, and we're not about to defend Edgar for attempting to dump them in a river or abandon them in a foreign country. However, put yourself in his shoes. Imagine you've dedicated most of your life to serving this wealthy woman. You're basically part of her family at that point. Now, furthermore, imagine that she's decided to leave all her money and assets to her pet cats, who could not do anything with them anyway. Call me crazy, but I don't really think his frustration was unreasonable. Just, you know, the whole being willing to drown cats thing took stuff a few steps too far, especially since he didn't even directly talk about his grievances with her. Understandable does not equal excusable. Next up, we have the aliens from Chicken Little, whose worst deed was global terrorism. You know how sometimes you'll lose something important, go on an absolute rampage trying to find it only to calm down immediately after figuring out that it was in your pocket or something like that the whole time? Yeah, that's basically what these guys did. When their son Kirby ends up lost on a faraway planet, they go across the whole solar system searching for him, and they're more than willing to destroy buildings, vaporize citizens, and even scramble the brains of innocent bystanders if it means possibly getting their son back. When you look at it objectively, the aliens didn't do anything out of malice. They just wanted to find their son, who they thought was in serious danger.
Well, then, this is awkward,
If it were humans terrorizing the Earth for that reason, it'd be a bit less morally gray, but as it stands, I guess we can judge the aliens with a different measuring stick. Speaking of which, next up is Captain Gantu, whose worst deed was kidnapping Lilo. See, once again, we have to take intergalactic cultural differences into consideration. A human kidnapping a little Hawaiian girl as a snack for an animal born in a lab? Unspeakably horrible. Like, I don't think it gets much more evil than that, but then you have Gantu, a space alien who's really just trying to do his job and save his job by hunting down Stitch and bringing him back for his boss. Not only is he trying to do that, but he's nice enough to give his prisoner a free snack for the ride over. What a stand-up guy, at least in comparison to most of the others on this list. For instance, next up we have Tamatoa, that crustaceous disco ball whose worst deed is eating people. Tamatoa is a gigantic crab monster, so it's not exactly shocking that he'd resort to eating people. Heck, you don't even have to be an evil crab monster to do that. Look at Zoidberg from Futurama. That guy's just hungry.
A big boy's gotta eat.
Really, the worst we could say about Tamatoa's misdeed here is the fact that he has human-level intelligence, which means that eating another creature with human intelligence is a big no-no for him. But unless it becomes canon that Tamatoa was human before becoming a giant shiny crab, it doesn't change his placement that much. All right, now, how about an entry that'll really surprise you? Dr. Facilier is a pretty obvious one. His worst deed was con artistry with dark magic. Facilier was a cut and dry evildoer who conned people into striking deals with him, using words carefully to make it sound as though he was about to grant their wildest dreams. In actuality, reality though, he'd generally just end up being a major troll who'd twist his own words in a creative way to mess with his clients. While this does lead to some truly awful stuff, like forcibly mutating a human man into a frog, it's also worth noting that Facilier has gotten himself into some extreme debt. Does that excuse his willingness to extort and harm others for his own gain? No! And we will acknowledge that he's still primarily motivated by greed. But at the end of the day, more than anything, Facilier was just trying to make a better life for himself. He just went way too far and ended up desperately trying to keep himself from being dragged into hell. We aren't saying that he isn't evil, but when the worst thing you do outside of extreme duress is stepping on a talking firefly, we can't give you a very high spot in this scenario. Finally, let's snuff out the light of this category by talking about Yzma, whose worst deed was attempted murder and usurpation. And, like, seriously, if you haven't listened to that unused villain song of hers, please do yourself a favor and go do that. But we digress. Let's talk about what actually happened in the movie. Yzma gets fired by her ungrateful emperor/boss for almost no reason, and this is after having raised him practically on her own. I'm not saying this justifies Yzma trying to straight up poison Cusco, but considering how much of an arrogant jerk he was before befriending Pacha, we can't say we blame her too much for trying to usurp him either. Heck, she might have honestly done better than Cusco as an emperor, even if what she did was still high treason. What we could blame her for was telling Kronk she hated his spinach puffs. But honestly, some deeds are too evil even for a list like this. But if we were to include such a monstrous deed, it'd be in a category like this one. These are the inexcusably terrible deeds. First up is Professor Callahan, whose worst deed was letting Tadashi die. We were strongly considering his attempts to murder Cray as a better candidate for this list, but then we considered the fact that Callahan did all that for revenge. When someone allows your daughter to be stranded in space for years, of course you're gonna want some payback. It's much more despicable to let one of your most loyal pupils die a preventable death in a burning building when he was exclusively there to help save you. To his credit, he did feel remorse for what he'd done later on, but frankly, that's too little too late. It takes a special kind of evil to let someone who looks up to you that much die when you have the means to easily prevent that death, and to go further by telling his kid brother that it was his mistake that he died, even if he wasn't the one to pull the trigger. Callahan's grief made him pretty cruel, and we're glad he's got plenty of time to reflect on it. Jafar is up next. His worst deed is getting Gazim killed. We had to go a little bit back and forth on whether his case of attempted usurping was worth mentioning, but as bad as that was, we're giving the upper hand to his first on-screen action in the movie. Gazim is that short, pudgy thief who meets up with Jafar at the beginning of the movie, and if that rings a bell, you probably already know why we picked his demise as Jafar's lowest point. He ends up being devoured by the Cave of Wonders as a result of his cooperation with Jafar. As much of a lowlife as the little guy was, Jafar still completely used Gazim as nothing more than bait to try and fish out the genie's lamp, and while he was rightfully freaked out by his death, he basically saw it as more of an unfortunate business expense than anything else.
Gazim was obviously less than worthy.
If his abuse of Iago wasn't enough to convince you of how little Jafar cares for others, this moment surely would have done the trick. Now let's talk about a much less famous but no less flamboyant villain, Madame Mim, whose worst deed was attempted child murder. Yeah, we aren't even in the top 20 yet. When her attempts to impress Arthur with her malicious magic fall flat, she ends up straight up trying to kill him. If you ever think you're bad at taking rejection, just remember you aren't taking it like Madame Mim. Sure freaking hope. But that being said, it's worth noting that Madame Mim isn't quite right in the head. She's one of those villains who has that sort of opposite day mentality where anything that's seen as objectively good, like sunshine, rainbows, and puppies, is seen as unequivocally bad to her.
Oh, that's terrible. Thank you, my boy.
She's still very much aware of what she's doing, so that doesn't give her too much credit, but the more mentally sound killers still have way more to answer for, if you ask us. So with that, let's swing on over to Clayton from Tarzan, whose worst deed was attempted murder. As if manipulating Tarzan, a man who's lived his whole life in the jungle, into leading him to his gorilla family weren't bad enough, Clayton takes his evil one step further by trapping Tarzan himself in a cage, likely planning to kill him so that he wouldn't leave any witnesses. Even having his gun smashed to bits didn't stop Clayton from trying to kill Tarzan, which would ultimately lead to a death he could have prevented if he'd just taken a few more chill pills. If there's one profession Disney movies can't stand, apparently it's poachers. Still, as evil as Clayton's plot was, Hans has a slightly worse case of attempted murder under his belt. The guy fully intended to marry into Anna's family for no reason other than to get his hands on those sweet, sweet royal benefits. Not only was he willing to manipulate a vulnerable, sheltered young woman into a marriage, but he was willing to murder her sister in cold blood to ensure sure that Anna would become the ruler. To make matters worse, the fact that he straight up tells Anna about this point blank tells us that he got some sort of sick sadistic pleasure from it. Either that, or it was just a moment of very poor judgment. You're not just wrong, Hans, you're stupid. Now let's talk about one of the oldest villains in the book. Lady Tremaine, whose worst deed is child abuse. And this really shouldn't be a surprise. Like, the woman's whole shtick is enslaving her stepdaughter into cleaning her mansion 24/7, verbally abusing her through the process. Once Cinderella finds a man and gets out from under that horrible roof, Tremaine resorts to using her biological daughters as abuse targets, proving that at the end of the day, all she cares about is having a punching bag to hold power over.
Oh, really?
While she's one of the smaller scale villains in Disney's lineup, the fact that her cruelty isn't based on supervillainous ambitions makes it feel all the more cutting. Now it's time to move on to the man who single-handedly keeps the egg industry afloat. Gaston has done plenty of bad deeds, but backstabbing the Beast was definitely his lowest point. After spending the entire movie rallying the townspeople to slay the evil Beast so he could steal back the girl who had the guts to turn down his advances,
I'll have Belle for my wife.
Gaston proved himself to be an absolute coward. During his confrontation with the Beast, Gaston got absolutely bodied, and he begged for mercy from the very creature he was trying to kill throughout the entire movie. And against all odds, the Beast accepted this. Unfortunately, Gaston doesn't know how to take a W when he sees it, so he immediately decided to stab the Beast in the back after being shown mercy, extinguishing any hope that Gaston had any good left in his heart. Thankfully, the absolute buffoon ended up falling to his doom as a result of his arrogance, adding one last insult to one very final injury. Following him is another villain with a large presence, Ratcliffe, with the obvious worst deed of violent racism. Really, this guy just barely qualifies as a villain, but not for lack of trying. While he's far from the most threatening Disney villain, the guy's blatant disregard for human life still makes him a pretty scummy person in general. He's the type who sends others to do his dirty work while he reaps the majority of the benefits, and is willing to have people killed even when there's no guarantee of a reward. But while this is obviously terrible on its own, he was definitely at his worst when he decided to send his people to war against the Native Americans for the crimes of... Oh, let me check my notes. Oh, yeah, being different and maybe having gold. That's right. There are a lot of Disney villains who'd be an absolute nightmare to work for, but this guy probably takes the cake in that regard. Still, there are some villains who have even less reason to hold their positions of power, like the Queen of Hearts, whose worst deed was unlawful execution. Now, come on. When your catchphrase is literally off with their heads, what else can you possibly be remembered for?
Off with his head!
The Queen of Hearts is basically what happens when you give an immature, unstable toddler power over an entire country. That's not even much of an exaggeration, really. She's a toddler in the body of a middle-aged woman who throws tantrums and everything's don't go her way.
If I lose my temper, you lose your head!
And given how she has the power to have people straight up beheaded for literally any reason she comes up with, there's been no shortage of unjust casualties during her reign, for reasons as petty as her missing a shot in croquet. If only she were better at the game, maybe fewer people would have had to say farewell to their head. But while he was much less direct, we'd argue that Prince John probably killed even more people through his crime of mass extortion. If you thought Drake couldn't handle a diss track, hello to this guy. One rightfully earned roast from his subjects was all it took for Prince John to go from a greedy toddler who stole from the poor to keep himself rich to, well, the exact same thing, but on an even larger scale. Prince John is so greedy and self-absorbed that he'd be willing to starve his entire country, women and children included, to keep his own pockets filled with gold. There's just no sense of compassion in this guy, really. He's a total mask-off portrayal of a corrupt ruler, openly taxing people who are starving and suffering to keep himself happy. That said, given his childlike temper and total lack of maturity or empathy, we feel like he can't be charged quite as harshly as some of the more self-aware villains. He's by far one of the least evil characters at this point in our list, but Captain Hook's worst deed of trying to kill Peter Pan is still pretty devious when you think about it. Sure, there's the theory that Captain Hook is a lost boy himself. There's also the fact that Peter Pan is a kid who never grows up, which means he could have been in Neverland for ages for all we know. But that doesn't change the fact that Captain Hook is repeatedly attempting to murder a child essentially for fun. He does share the same devil's advocate talking point of the Queen of Hearts, basically being a kid in an adult's body, which saves him from a lower spot, but just barely. The fact is that Hook just leaves too much of a gray area to place higher or lower, and since he seems to enjoy fighting Peter as a rival for fun rather than any world-conquering ambitions, we'll place him here for now. With that, let's move on to Madame Medusa, whose worst deed was kidnapping and endangering Penny. It's one thing to be an aspiring jewel thief with few motivations beyond, ooh, big shiny thing, but to kidnap a child and to endanger her by forcing her to try and steal the diamond for you, it's one of those lines you shouldn't even consider crossing, and the fact that Medusa was willing to do so says a lot about just how vile she truly is. To make matters worse with how often she apparently offered rides to Penny, it's clear that Medusa had plenty of time to think about what she was doing and just didn't care. No price, not even the safety of a little girl, was too steep to pay for that big diamond. But with Madame Medusa, there was at least a chance for her young victim to not die. That can't be said for Maleficent, the unapologetically evil enchantress whose worst deed was cursing Princess Aurora. You know that feeling of being seemingly the only one not invited to a party or some other kind of event? It really stings when that happens, doesn't it? Really makes you want to use dark magic to curse an infant child to die right before the age of 16, right? No, it doesn't. Well, congratulations! You're at least slightly less petty and psychotic than Maleficent, whose reaction to not being invited to a baby's christening was to essentially sign her supernatural death warrant.
Gee, I wonder why they didn't want to invite the supernatural baby killer to the baby christening.
Still, as horribly as Maleficent's magic was used here, the final category is reserved for the characters who caused even more inexplicable, horrible, and/or widespread harm. These are the unspeakably horrific crimes. First up in this section is Shere Khan, whose worst deed was mass murder. If Shere Khan's worst deed was just trying to kill Mowgli, he'd probably have a much lower spot on our list. After all, his cruelty aside, he is an animal who deeply fears mankind and the power they hold over the animal kingdom. However, we have to consider that it's not just humans who are afraid of Shere Khan. The other animals also fear him, a fact that he sadistically revels in constantly. Just look at that smug face of his. Man, you can't convince us that he hasn't made an example out of many of his fellow jungle dwellers, but even Shere Khan might be sent running if you were to encounter Scar, whose worst deed was killing Mufasa and nearly Simba. I'm sure that by now we all know that Scar always wanted a brother, but that only makes his actions in the original movie hurt more. Jealousy over your brother being a king and your nephew being a soon-to-be king is one thing, well, technically two, but to go through with a plot to endanger your nephew's life so that his father would die trying to save him and ideally take said nephew with him, that's a whole new low. And the fact that Scar had to improvise when he saw that Simba was alive shows that he was completely ready and willing to have a child murdered just so he could have his place on the throne. We can sympathize with Scar feeling cheated, but betraying his entire living family like that is just, well, there's just no coming back from that, no matter how catchy the song your past self sang was. It was okay. Now, let's move on to Bill Sykes, whose worst deed was child abduction for blackmail. Bill Sykes is a ruthless loan shark, which means pretty much nothing is off the table for him as long as it gets him paid. When his debtor, Fagin, ends up accidentally blackmailing a little girl by holding her cat hostage thinking it belongs to her rich parents, he, having an actual moral compass, gave all of her back to her for no cost. Unfortunately, Sykes was nowhere near as not depraved as Fagin, so he was totally chill with kidnapping Jenny and holding her for ransom money from her parents. Unfortunately for Billy, he wouldn't have even lived long enough to see that ransom money if it came. From one case of child kidnapping to another, next is Mother Gothel, whose worst deed was kidnapping Rapunzel. Since Gothel wasn't holding Rapunzel for ransom or anything, and at least she did the bare minimum to care for her in general, we were at least a little bit tempted to place her lower than Sykes. But honestly, after considering it, what Gothel did was kind of even worse. In Sykes' case, he fully intended to give Jenny back to her parents as long as they had paid off Fagin's debts, finishing his work for the time being. Gothel, on the other hand, wasn't out for money or anything. She just kidnapped Rapunzel to use her magical hair as an anti-aging treatment. This woman literally deprived Rapunzel of almost 2 decades of life just so she could use her as a skincare regimen. Let's just thank our lucky stars that Yzma didn't find Rapunzel instead. Poor kid would have never gotten out of that tower. Mayor Bellwether is up next with a little deed we like to call Predator Gate. Zootopia might not have the most impressive twist villain, but it certainly has one of the most convoluted. Bellwether is so vehemently racist towards predators that she resorted to commissioning some Breaking Bad fans to create a drug that turned them into mindless killing machines. This would lead to the predators committing violent, unstoppable crimes which would destroy their public image, enable her to sabotage her boss, and take his place as the mayor. Had she not been caught, Bellwether would have turned the world more against predatory animals than they'd ever been before, assuring that people like Nick would continue to be led astray for years to come. For the sheer gravity of Bellwether's misdeeds, we had to place her pretty low, even if she was only evil on screen for like 5 minutes. But although it's not on as large of a scale, the evil queen's worst deed was attempted child murder, or quite possibly the pettiest reason we've ever seen. Bellwether was scum, sure, but at least she had something adjacent to a reason for hating predators. The evil queen, though, let's see, a mirror told her that this 12-year-old girl was prettier than her, so she resorted to poisoning her so that she would be the prettiest by proxy. You could just work on your appearance, maybe, or accept that this mirror's opinion isn't fact, and that the fact that he prefers the look of a 12-year-old girl to a grown woman says more about him than you, but no. Child murder it is, I guess. It's hard to think of a more pure-hearted target to try and torment, but Oogie Boogie took on that challenge by torturing Santa Claus. It shouldn't be a surprise that Oogie Boogie ended up this low. Like, the guy's so creepy that he's an outcast, last in Halloween Town, of all places. Still, being touted as only the second scariest creature in Halloween Town isn't enough for Boogie, so when the elusive Sandy Claus is delivered right into his clutches, Oogie Boogie decides to try and up his evil score by torturing the poor guy. Being a true opportunist, Oogie Boogie also considers the possibility that Jack would come to retrieve Santa, so he's probably planning another act of torture as well. But if we had to choose between Oogie Boogie's torture of one man or Ursula's con artistry and torture of poor, unfortunate souls, yeah, the choice is pretty clear. Ursula and Ariel have a lot in common. Really, they both love collecting and no, that's about it, isn't it? The difference is that while Ariel likes collecting human relics and trinkets, Ursula likes to collect the souls of naive mer people who fail to collect this sea witch's debts. While this could be excused as a business expense, albeit quite a horrific one, it's clear by her attempted sabotage of Ariel that she never intends for her clients to fulfill their end of the bargain. That tells us that she just has a weird interest in collecting people's souls and keeping their bodies as decorations in her garden. At least Facilier was in actual danger, girl. What's your excuse? If you think those souls were poor and unfortunate, Nalo's victims got an even more raw deal. He's guilty of sinking the island of Motofetu. Well, we don't actually see Nalo until the post-credits scene, which, like, can you blame me for not expecting Moana 2 to have one of those? We do know his backstory. This malevolent god resorted to sinking an entire island for no reason other than the fact that it was where the people of the world met in peace and harmony. Unfortunately for them, Nalo, being a professional hater, decided that letting people be unified was just too risky, so he decided to sink the island itself and make sure the people would be separated from each other for eternity, even going as far as blocking the island with a mighty storm. Insecurity is one dangerous attribute if you let it go too far, and this guy is proof of that. Imagine being a god who could basically do whatever you want, yet your sole priority is making sure people can't talk to each other. Really, dude? Wait until this guy finds out phones are eventually gonna be invented. We're moving into the truly unforgivable deeds now, so let's talk about arguably the most evil villain in Disney's history. The Horned King does not fit in with the rest of Disney's villain lineup, nor does his crime of attempted mass necro-slavery. That's right, this guy's crime is so wild I had to make up a term for it. Even if we were to ignore the fact that he was willing to threaten goblins, animals, and children alike should they hesitate to do his bidding, this man was trying to raise an army of undead creatures for the sole purpose of terrorizing the earth and becoming a god among mortals. The Horned King doesn't have anything even close to a moral compass, which simultaneously makes him a clear choice for one of Disney's most evil villains, and a character whose plan still falls just shy of the worst moments of the slightly more human villains. For example, take Percival McLeach from The Rescuers Down Under, whose worst deed was attempted child murder. Even if Percy here hadn't tried to kill Cody to ensure that there weren't any witnesses to all of his crimes, we still think he'd end up around this low on our list. This guy was willing to abduct and torture a little boy just so he could hunt down an endangered bird and sell it. Disney has a lot of evil poachers in its film catalog, but this guy is by far the most depraved of them. To do all of that to a child and ultimately decide it's worth letting him be mauled to death by crocodiles to ensure he doesn't tell anyone is pure evil on a whole nother level. And we've still got 6 more horrific moments to cover. Let's move right along by talking about the rightly named Cruella de Vil, whose worst deed was trying to skin puppies. Guys, level with me. Do I really need to explain this one? Like, Cruella's whole motivation is that she wants to have puppies skinned so she can make their pelts into a nice coat for herself. Even if Cruella probably wasn't going to be the one to actually do this, the fact that she'd resort to hiring help to do something so heinous for so little reason is proof that she's the type of person who will throw every bit of common decency out the window to get what she wants. Even if you take the live-action flashback of her parents getting killed by Dalmatians, which I still can't believe is a real thing, it doesn't excuse murdering poor little puppies. Perhaps the only thing crueler than hurting a baby animal is hurting, well, a baby. Enter Hades, whose worst deed was his attempted infanticide of Hercules. It's probably not easy to be the ruler of the underworld, but to add to that burden the dream of taking over the world, Hades had his hands full, which is exactly why he took no issue with sending Pain and Panic to do his dirty work for him by killing Hercules, a literal infant at the time, before said Hercules could ever throw a wrench into his plan of world domination. As depraved and cutthroat as this was, we still have to take into account the fact that Hades technically wasn't the one who did this. He just commanded his underlings to do so under the threat of eternal torment. Is that any better? No, actually not really, but we still want to give even more discredit to the villains who got their hands dirtier. Enter the man who just barely missed out on our top 3, Claude Frollo, whose worst deed was trying to drown a baby. Despite being a church official, Frollo was rotten to the core. He spends the entire movie doing horrible things, but nothing quite compares to his act at the very beginning. Not only does Frollo murder a woman desperately trying to seek sanctuary for herself and her baby, but when he sees that the baby is ugly, he tries to drop it into a well, quite literally the only thing that's stops Frollo is the fact that he fears being eternally punished for his sin, which naturally leads him to committing different sins by raising Quasi as his own, keeping him locked in an attic by himself and constantly reminding him that everyone will hate him because he's ugly. It's a wild situation when Cloud Frollo's worst deed is anything but number one, but we've got 3 more characters who we think did even worse. The Bronze Medal of Evil goes to Shan Yu, whose worst deed was slaughtering a whole village of people in one of the most morbid, heartbreaking scenes in Disney history. Shan Yu leads his troops in a massacre of an entire village. This basically combines every violent crime we've covered so far. It's mass murder, including child murder, and basically any kind of murder you can think of. Worst of all, the whole ordeal was brought about because Shan Yu picked up a little girl's doll, determined the specific village it must have come from, and decided to use it as an opportunity to show off his strength by burning the place to the ground. While Shan Yu was the one leading this massacre, he certainly wasn't the only one participating in it, which is frankly the only thing keeping him from our top spot. Similarly, just barely missing out on the gold medal is the coachman from Pinocchio, whose worst deed was child transmutation and trafficking. Endangering children is horrible on its own, but the only way to make it even worse would be to do so for an even more nefarious purpose. The coachman, with the help of Honest John and Gideon, recruits every mischievous young boy he can find to come to Pleasure Island, an amusement park where kids can destroy property, eat junk food, and drink alcohol to their heart's content, only for the coachman himself to have them transformed into donkeys and sold into slavery. That is, I don't know where to begin with this one. It has to be one of the most disturbing things a Disney villain has ever done.
I want to go home to my mama!
And it's made worse by the fact that there's no scene of the victims being returned to their human forms or anything. For all we know, the coachman fully sold mutant children as slaves and got away with it, which makes him not only one of the most despicable Disney villains, but one of the most successful. But for our gold medalist of evil, we have to pay our respects to Ratigan. I know. Really? This guy? We just got there talking about a corrupt priest, monstrous war general, and a straight up child slave trafficker, and the only guy with a worse track record is a mouse? What could this guy possibly done to justify his position here? Well, to answer that, all we have to do is listen to his admittedly underrated villain song.
Even meaner, you made it worse than the widows and orphans you drowned.
Yeah, play that back one more time. So, yeah, Ratigan's worst deeds are drowning widows and orphans, not trying to take over the universe, not trying to make money or anything, literally just doing it for fun. You know what's even crazier? Ratigan also kidnapped a child, held her for ransom so her father would help him with his evil plans, and ultimately killed his only friend to make his escape easier. And we didn't even have to mention that to justify his top spot. Say what you will about Ratigan, but the guy has mastered the art of being evil for the sake of being evil. Truly, he was the world's greatest, most utterly depraved criminal mind.
Sadistic dictators, demonic tyrants, power-hungry sorcerers, and sea witches, gods of the underworld. Even they need friends, or more specifically, sidekicks.
Thirsty?
Today we're ranking every Disney villain sidekick from evil to most evil. That said, this list is specifically for sidekicks, mind you, so there might be a few repeat entries from our main villain rankings. As usual, we'll start off with the redeemed sidekicks, who either learned their lesson or never had much ill will to begin with.
From above, the wicked shall receive their just reward.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together right off the bat, because our pick for the least evil Disney villain sidekick is undoubtedly Kronk. Let's be honest, did anyone not see this one coming? Kronk is probably one of the nicest characters in Disney history, let alone the nicest of the antagonists. Right off the bat, he's the whole reason Emperor Kuzco wasn't killed in the first act of the movie, since he refused to fully follow Yzma's plan for disposing of him, opting instead to let him escape.
Hope that doesn't come back to haunt me.
He has a good heart, and whenever he isn't following Yzma's orders, he proves himself to be a helpful and genuinely compassionate guy, something that's emphasized even further in the sequel, Kronk's New Groove. Here we see even more sides to Kronk, from him being a caring scout leader to a generous friend of senior citizens, even right down to him giving Yzma a second chance when she tricks him into thinking she'd turned over a new leaf. To be completely fair, Kronk did make some major mistakes, but he's also definitely done the most total good out of all the characters on our list, so we're giving him a big thumbs up alongside the gold medal of good. Taking a close runner-up position is Goob from Meet the Robinsons. Michael Yagubian. Truly a cautionary tale of why you should always be a considerate roommate. Keep your friends up too late just one too many times, and you might just end up ruining their life on accident, or rather, you'll cause them to lose a baseball game and resultantly decide to devote their entire life to ruining yours. These things just happen.
I don't care. I just want to ruin your life.
Poor Goob was a victim of circumstance, but thankfully his story didn't end there. He is a sidekick after all, and the bowler hat guy is the sidekick of the bowler hat itself, aka Doris. After Doris successfully manages to take over the world by manipulating Goob, the latter is absolutely horrified. This proves that he literally never wanted to hurt anyone, but just wanted to take Louis down a peg or two as payback. After Louis defeats Doris, the Robinsons invite Goob to join their family, only for him to decline it, showing a true sense of remorse and sadness for his crimes. Thankfully, like Kronk, he ultimately got a happy ending when Louis used his time travel to make sure he woke up in time to win the baseball game. He saved him from a lifetime of pain and misery. As long as Goob steers clear of bowler hats, he'll be just fine. Taking third place, we have Jumba and Pleakley from Lilo and Stitch. Really, all the antagonists from Lilo and Stitch could be argued as both sidekicks and as not really evil. The most notable ones, though, are the pair assigned to go to Earth to exterminate Stitch. Jumba, his creator, and Pleakley, the former Galactic Federation Earth expert. Ignoring the fact that these two really were just doing their jobs, all of their destructive tendencies and overzealous nature is made up for in the end when they decide to help rescue Stitch and Lilo.
He's very persuasive.
Persuasive?
Realizing Stitch had not only reformed, but had done so enough to make a friend. As a result, 2 more friends are added to that group, and any guy who's nice enough to dress up as Santa on Christmas can't be all that bad, right? Now, you can't judge a book by its cover. Enter Iago from Aladdin. You wouldn't expect our red parrot voiced by Gilbert Gottfried to be one of the most clever antagonists in Disney's repertoire, nor would you expect him to basically have an entire hidden redemption arc.
You know something? You're nothing without me. What?
But as it turns out, in the straight-to-DVD Return of Jafar sequel, Iago is more or less the main character, or at least the one who gets the most substantial arc. Okay, first things first, we're not gonna ignore everything Iago did throughout both movies. In the first one, he contributed to Jafar's plans quite generously.
Excellent work, Iago.
And only seemed to be opposed to the ones that endangered him or took advantage of him. That selfishness carries over to the second movie, where he's just as mean as ever, only teaming up with Aladdin to try to trick him into having a comfy home in the palace, and ultimately betraying him out of fear of Jafar. All of that is pretty bad, but after seeing how much Aladdin and Jasmine are willing to believe in him despite his mistakes, he feels genuine remorse. Without any overstated apologies, Iago ultimately turns on Jafar again to free Aladdin's friends from their shackles, allowing them to pursue Jafar on the magic carpet. And even after Aladdin assures Iago that he's done enough and all is forgiven, Iago still comes in at the very last second to fight Jafar and ultimately knock his lamp into the lava, assuring that he's hopefully gone for good. Iago might still be sarcastic, loud, and even a bit mean, but he's got one lesson learned that overrides all of that. He's a good friend. And okay, maybe he's a bit of a freeloader, but I'd say he's earned it this time. And closing out this first section, we have one of Cinderella's stepsisters, Anastasia. Like Lady Tremaine and Drizella, Anastasia spent the whole first movie verbally and sometimes physically abusing Cinderella, but she thankfully shares something in common with another Disney villain, Iago. And no, I'm not referring to the fabled Cinderella 4 where she's voiced by Gilbert Gottfried. Rather, I'm talking about the fact that these two both had some straight-to-DVD redemption arcs, with Anastasia learning to respect and care for Cinderella after the latter decides to hook her up with the man she'd fallen in love with. Sure, it took her a while to discover how awful her family really was, but sometimes people can be blind to that kind of stuff. What matters is that Anastasia was able to overcome her upbringing and become a pretty decent person, all things considered. And that's enough to keep her out of neutral territory. This is the gray area. First up, we have the highly recommended Wiggins from Pocahontas. He's the right-hand man to Governor Ratcliffe, and for some inexplicable reason, he absolutely loves the guy.
I like you.
As a result, he never really has any reservations about following his boss's usually petty orders, nor unfortunately his orders to help the gang prepare for all-out assault on the native peoples. But with that being said, Wiggins isn't really malicious on his own, he just does his boss's bidding, and is genuinely disappointed in him when he's arrested for his crimes, showing that he definitely had his limits. A very secondary duo was up next. Trigger and Nutsy may be vultures, but they aren't out for death or anything. In fact, these two seem to be loyal to whomever's wearing the crown, making them the definition of just following orders. Of course, like Wiggins, those orders could come from bad people like Prince John, but it's not really Trigger and Nutsy's job to determine that. They're just simple henchmen doing their work, and they're every bit as loyal to King Richard in the end. And that said, basing your morality on that of whomever you work for makes you more of a lump of clay than a hero or villain, so we can't place these guys any higher nor lower. Next we have Sour Bill from Wreck-It Ralph. Interestingly enough, Bill here is really only on the list because he technically qualifies as a villain sidekick. He has no problems following King Candy's underhanded orders, despite not even seeming to like him all that much, which honestly really makes his morality hard to draw conclusions about. Like, he does do bad stuff, sure, but he's also not really doing it because of some underhanded motive or anything. Even after the king's defeat, he doesn't seem much more happy nor depressed, which means he might be less of a devious henchman and more of a grumpy NPC.
Not making the same mistake with you.
The Huntsman from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is up next. Mother Gothel would be proud of the queen for having such jealousy of her daughter that she'd willingly send an assassin to take her out. Thankfully though, despite having some concerningly easy access to the heart of a pig, the Huntsman turned out to be a pretty chill guy. It's definitely shady that he was willing to hunt her down in the first place, but while this is the bare minimum, at least he decided to warn Snow White of her jealous stepmother instead of going through with it. Next we have by far the most neutral character on our list, the Magic Mirror from Snow White. Come on, you ask a mirror an honest question and it gives you an honest answer. What's the sin here exactly? I mean, sure, it's kind of weird that this mirror's choice for the fairest of them all was some random teenage girl who was in the woods. Oh, okay, all right, maybe this guy's kind of weird. At least he's honest though, which is why you should be very glad he's in this movie and not in Shrek. As terrifying as she is in her context, Joanna from The Rescuers Down Under is a victim of circumstance. In other words, she's a pet who has a really mean owner, and since we don't get any anthropomorphic dialogue from her, we don't know a lot about what drives her. We do know some things though. She likes eggs, for instance, and she'll gladly screw around with McLeach's head trying to snack on some. She also has a penchant for hunting down whatever small animals her owner lets her go for. She's pretty ruthless, but she's also, well, an animal. She isn't trying to take over the world, nor even be excessively cruel or anything. She just wants to eat and to avoid as much of McLeach's abuse as she can. She spent way longer than would have been pleasant with him, but at least she didn't die with him, so hopefully Joanna is doing alright. If you're out there, Joanna, let us know you're okay. Oh, and like and subscribe. And for our last morally questionable sidekick, we have Smee from Peter Pan. He's the right-hand man to Hook, who we'd also argue is one of the less evil Disney villains out there. But whether you believe in Hook's status as a lost boy or not, he has one of the better relationships with his sidekick. Smee, for a pirate, is remarkably friendly and even polite in his own way. He'll defend Hook from crocs and octopi and generally doesn't do much aside from following his orders, which, to be fair, do still include hunting down children with intent to kill.
Carrying out your orders!
This is Neverland, so morals are way different here than they are elsewhere, but Smee still has just enough wiggle room to keep him firmly out of our good and bad categories. He's one of those sidekicks who really just exists to make sure his boss doesn't go too far off the rails, it seems. Oh, if only some other villains were so lucky. It's time to get to the meat and potatoes. These henchmen are the bad to evil. Soaring right on over to the bad guys, we have Hayabusa from Mulan. Even one of the most utterly irredeemable Disney villains out there can't help but have a soft spot for his pet. Shan Yu's falcon Hayabusa is primarily a spy who helps alert the Huns when there's a breach in their defenses by China or an opportunity to strike. Like Joanna, Hayabusa is an animal just doing what he's been trained to do, so we can't exactly call him a complete monster for that, even if he shows a little too much pleasure in his master's evil deeds. I mean, how else could you expect a bird to behave when his owner is Shan Yu? Next up we have Drizella from Cinderella. Unlike the other ugly stepsister, the money-hungry Drizella never really had a redemption arc to overcome her mother's hatred. Once Cinderella is out of the house, Drizella turns on Anastasia to keep up her pattern of cruelty, which leads to Anastasia gaining a conscience and ultimately to Drizella being reduced to working as a maid in Cinderella's home. Despite being one of the more polite villains on the list, Lawrence still has earned a pretty low place. In his defense, the guy has been pushed around his entire life, from his family to his boss to his non-existent wife. Everyone he's ever been involved with has basically just used him as a means to an end. And as it often goes, this has led to Lawrence wanting to put the shoe on the other foot, going from the guy who gets pushed around to the one who does the pushing. This makes him an easy target for Dr. Facilier, making him quick to accept a deal with him and more than willing to try and usurp Naveen by tricking Charlotte into marrying him.
I most definitely will marry you!
We can sympathize with a guy who just wants a better life for himself, but the thing about Lawrence is that he could have easily just tried to find another job. Instead, he was underhanded enough to cheat his way into royalty no matter who he had to step on to get there. So he's less of a pure evil guy and more of a guy who was just pushed past his limit. He just really should have channeled his frustration in a healthier way. Flotsam and Jetsam are a pair of few words and no words in the remake, but they make up for that with their actions. They never hesitate to follow Ursula's orders, whether it's as simple as spying on Ariel or as maniacal as tipping over the boat she's on to potentially drowning Prince Eric. There's no limit to the misdeeds these two will do. The only thing keeping them from an even lower spot though is the fact that they're two of the less intelligent henchmen on our list. If anything, it almost seems like Ursula is a motherly figure to the pair and she's genuinely heartbroken when she kills her babies. Mind you, that still wouldn't make Flotsam and Jetsam innocent by any means, but it would add another side to their villainy, since they'd really just be following the orders of the woman who's cared for them their whole lives. On a similar note, Diablo also falls into the category of devoted pets, but being both a pet and a familiar to Maleficent, we have to give Diablo some harsher judgment since he's more intelligent than the usual animal sidekick, not to mention the only one of Maleficent's henchmen who realized that Aurora wouldn't still be a baby after 16 years. If we had a brilliance center medal, it would obviously be going to Diablo, but all we have here is a low spot to reflect his willingness to hunt down and kidnap a teenage girl to appease his master's grudge. Now let's talk about about two of the cruelest pets in Disney history, Roscoe and DeSoto from Oliver and Company. Usually with Disney villains as pets, they're either intelligent enough to interact with their foes like Iago or much more animalistic like Joanna. Roscoe and DeSoto kind of fit both categories, acting as Sykes' guard dogs who are more than willing to intimidate his debtors and their pets. To us, it might not seem like such a big deal, but these dogs are basically the animal equivalent of loan sharks, and while we're hesitant to call them outright evil, they certainly aren't good dogs either.
It's party time.
That said, they are still dogs, which means that they're counting on doing their master's bidding to get their next meal, and bad or not, they also didn't deserve to go out like that. Jeez, old Disney movies got dark. In classic old-school Disney henchman fashion, Mr. Snoops from The Rescuers paddles his way into the next spot. He may have had a more ambiguous fate than his boss, but that doesn't mean that Snoops should have gotten away with his crimes. Even if he wasn't the head honcho he thought of himself as, he still very much wanted to be seen as an intimidating foe and was more than willing to kidnap and extort a child for the sake of getting that sweet moolah. On top of that, he's more level-headed than his boss, being less concerned with the devil's eye having some kind of supernatural powers and more concerned with how much he could resell it for on eBay.
Oh, they'll sell for a lot of cold cash.
That is to say that he's definitely one of the greedier sidekicks, to the point where he was willing to steal the gem from Madame Medusa after she proved her willingness to turn on him. And being more concerned with money than your own life is a surefire ticket to the greed sinner medal. No one's bad as Gaston, no one's rad as Gaston, and nobody is quite so down bad for Gaston as Le Faux. First things first, Lost Center Medal. Yeah, it's mostly a joke, but come on. Le Faux isn't even being paid to hang around Gaston like most villain sidekicks. He just really likes Gaston, and that liking towards him leads to absolutely no questioning his evil deeds. Whether it's getting Maurice falsely imprisoned in an asylum or attempting to kill the Beast and all his transformed servants, Le Faux was a ride or die for Gaston, no matter how much he got pushed around. Forget Belle, this is the real Stockholm Syndrome plot point of the movie, people. From one short sidekick to another. Next up is Creeper. Oh man, from the Black Cauldron. Creeper may not be blowing up people's houses, not on screen at least, but he more than makes up for it by serving as the Horned King's right-hand goblin, making him an assistant to the arguable most evil villain in Disney history.
Bring in the prisoner!
Creeper is primarily motivated by fear of his master and will do absolutely anything to make sure he faces as little of his abuse as possible. This includes all the basic stuff: torture, interrogation, murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, etc. While we can't blame him for being terrified of the Horned King to the point where even he was happy when the latter died, the fact that he was willing to serve such a demonic entity for seemingly no reason but protecting his own butt makes him one of the lowest villain sidekicks around. The only thing he could do to go even lower would be to slither on the ground, like Sir Hiss. Like a certain other royal advisor from Disney classics, Sir Hiss uses his position to his advantage as much as possible. With the power to hypnotize others and the ability to help Prince John plan out his schemes, he's a legitimate threat to the safety of the kingdom, and more specifically to their wallets. Like Creeper, he takes a lot of abuse from his boss, but unlike Creeper, he seems significantly less terrified of him, even acting somewhat condescending on occasion.
Of course you've been robbed!
The only reason he isn't even lower is the simple fact that he does have some limits to his depravity, more so than Prince John at least, as shown when he was horrified at the idea of having Friar Tuck executed just as a means of easily finding Robin Hood. Still, there are definitely worse things you could do for money. Just take it from Walter, Jesse, and Doug from Zootopia. Those names might sound familiar, especially for dangerous drug chefs, and that's because they're named after the iconic main trio of Breaking Bad: Walter, Jesse, and everyone's favorite Breaking Bad character, Doug. Like the main villain of the movie, these three are sheep who are willingly cooking up the Night Howler serum to use on predators so that they'd be overwhelmed by violent instincts. It's bad enough to come up with an idea as depraved as this.
Gosh, think of the headline.
Endangering countless lives for the sake of becoming a little more racist, but these three were willing to go along with it and to get their hands dirty in the process, which arguably makes them even more guilty. Up next, we have Fidget from The Great Mouse Detective. Anyone who'd willingly hang around a guy as twisted and psychotic as Ratigan is pretty questionable right off the bat, and being willing to kidnap children, assist in acts of political crime and mass terrorism only makes him even worse. Fidget is a handicapped bat, but that still doesn't stop him from doing some pretty heinous stuff for his boss, and to make matters worse, we don't really see much of his reason for working for Ratigan. Considering how Ratigan almost killed him on at least one occasion and actually killed him on another, I highly doubt loyalty has anything to do with it. Just barely missing out on the bottom 5 is Lucifer from Cinderella. It might seem bizarre to have a cat below so many other villains, especially considering the sheer gravity of those villains' crimes. What's more, on top of having a significantly shorter rap sheet, Lucifer here has the just a regular animal excuse. Even if he is a highly intelligent cat, he's still just a cat who's loyal to his master. So why is he ranked so low? One word: hatred. Sheer unbridled hatred. When Lucifer isn't lounging around mooching off of his master, and by the way, he deserves a sloth center medal for that, he's chasing the mice around the house and delighting in their terror. He does the same to Cinderella, messing up floors she just cleaned and doing whatever he can to make her day even worse. I guess Lady Tremaine's upbringing was at least partially to blame though, and I hope Lucifer appreciates that tiny bit of leeway because the bottom 5 won't be getting that much. While these two are far from the most competent henchmen, Pain and Panic have committed more than enough cruel acts to warrant a place in our bottom 5. Being a high-ranking servant of the underworld is already enough to make us count you as pretty darn evil. These two may not always succeed, but they always have the full intention to carry out Hades' whims.
Reporting for duty!
Whether it's the basic stuff like spying on people or terrorizing them, or something as downright pure evil as kidnapping an immortal baby and attempting to murder him, there's nothing these two won't do for their master. But to be fair, their master is the literal god of the underworld, Hades. That does make us see their crimes in a slightly less unforgivable light, since we really don't know what they'd do if they weren't under the constant threat of eternal torment, and they did seem relieved when they realized that Hades might not come out of the river Styx, but whether they act out of fear or not, they're willing to kill babies if it means saving their own skin, so I say placing them even this high is being pretty nice. At number 4, we have the Stabbington brothers from Tangled. Being betrayed by a former friend and coworker definitely has to sting, and you'd think that would at least place these two among the more sympathetic henchmen, but then you have to consider the lengths they went in order to get revenge on Flynn. Their primary motives are money and malice, which collectively earns them both the Wrath Center Medal, and leads to them committing egregious crimes like kidnapping, stalking, and even attempted murder. Not only were they totally cool with the idea of kidnapping a teenage girl, but they were willing to essentially use her as a fountain of youth vending machine, which is basically a less outwardly disgusting way of pimping her out. Betrayed or not, that's the kind of evil you just don't stoop to unless you're seriously twisted. Our former gold medalists of evil, the hyenas, are now demoted to bronze. But given how many baddies we've talked about today, that's still quite the feat. They may not be the brightest bulbs in the socket, but don't be fooled. If you step into hyena territory, you're fresh meat as far as they're concerned. These guys don't care about species, age, gender, etc. If you breathe, you're their feed.
Hey, did we order this dinner to go?
Apparently even their own kind isn't immune to this either, since that Scar comic series confirmed that they'll occasionally eat one of their own kind if the need arises, all with a disturbingly nonchalant attitude about it, which earns them quite the easy gluttony cinder medal. As terrible as this is though, you have to remember that they are just animals trying to survive, which explains why they gladly accept help from Scar to usurp Mufasa's throne, and likewise explains why Scar was their next meal after he disavowed their friendship by blaming all the carnage on them. They might be evil, but even these guys know about the importance of friendship. Our runner-up position goes to the final human characters on our list, Horace and Jasper from 101 Dalmatians. Like many villains and henchmen alike, Horace and Jasper care about one thing and one thing only: money. But these two fall into that special category of greed, the one that makes characters like Mr. Krabs look like absolute saints in comparison. They're willing to do any amount of truly depraved things to make a quick buck, like kidnapping hundreds of puppies, skinning them, and ultimately plotting to kill them.
I'll pop them on the head. You do the skinning.
Other examples include, okay, I'm not sure if there are any, but do you need them? Like, they're literally murdering puppies, they're skinning the pets, they're eating the, okay, I'll stop, but you get the idea. These two are absolute sociopaths with no low they won't sink to if it means making a quick buck, and unlike characters like Pain and Panic or the hyenas, they aren't doing it out of necessity, they're doing it out of selfishness and sheer depravity, making them about as close to pure evil as you can get in a Disney movie. Or at least as close as a human can get. We're giving our golden medal of evil to Dr. Facilier's friends on the other side. Dr. Facilier wasn't born with his special brand of voodoo magic. He's had to borrow it from some friends on the other side.
He's got friends on the other side.
In other words, okay, these are basically voodoo demons from hell who are also loan sharks. They don't care what kind of horrific stuff Facilier does as long as he can ultimately pay them back, but even if he's flat broke, they're getting their payday anyway, as shown by his fate. In the end, Facilier is literally dragged into the pits of hell, screaming for his life, which showcases that these friends saw whatever incredible debt Facilier owed them and considered it equal with the opportunity to torment him for eternity. These guys are literally the embodiment of terror, selfishness, and sadism. And while this may be a hot take, I have a feeling they were never really Facilier's friends in the first place. But whether you agree with that or not, these fiends on the other side have earned their place on the other side of our ranking as the most evil sidekicks in Disney history.
The absolute power.
So, without further ado, I'm Keith Finosi with Wicked Binge, and this is Disney Villains, Weak to Powerful. Now, just like last time, no Pixar villains, no direct-to-DVD sequel original villains, and no villains from the Disney Channel. Theatrical villains only. With that said, it's time to kick things off with our weakest villain before working our way up. At our very bottom, we have the Aristocats' bumbling butler, Edgar. From his status as a humble servant to rich millionairess Madame Bonfamille, to his age and lack of any real strength, we felt that this time around he really did deserve to be ranked as the weakest villain. Now, that's not to say that Edgar is without his own strengths, as he was at the very least clever enough to successfully get rid of the Duchess and her kittens, at least for a short while. Then again, it really doesn't take a genius to trick some cats with a tasty treat before sneaking out in the middle of the night. You could also argue that the fact that he was willing to go through with his plan at all was pretty stupid. All that hard work when he could have just dealt with being a servant to Bonfamille's cats.
They'll be gone. Now think of a way.
After all, it's not as though the cats would really be able to do anything to stand up to him if he just decided to do the bare minimum of taking care of them before then spending the rest of the fortune on himself. Edgar is also extremely clumsy, seen stumbling over things like trash cans and barely being able to keep control of his motorcycle. Although he's able to stand his ground with them, he still just barely manages to not be completely overshadowed by the alley cats. It ultimately takes him getting hit over the head to be defeated, and while this is a reasonable weakness to have, we feel like a stronger person or even just a more capable fighter would have been able to fight off or trap all the cats before they knocked him out. Going from one of our oldest villains to one of our youngest, next is Foxy Loxy from Chicken Little. Apologies for not including her last time, though in retrospect, we really weren't missing much. Foxy Loxy is your typical schoolyard bully. Because she's so athletic and bombastic, it's fairly easy for her to get her classmates and even the rest of the town to her side when she proves to be a sports star. Her sports of choice seem to be dodgeball and baseball, and she proves to be very good at both of them. She's also got a lackey, Goosey Lucy, by her side, but while Foxy could easily outmatch someone as tiny and weak as Chicken Little, what brings Foxy down this low is her inability to fight off anything outside of the baseball field. She's just a kid after all, so when she tries to fight off one of the aliens armed with a rock, well, let's just say that it doesn't go well. We won't hold accidentally getting her personality altered against her, but all in all, Foxy really is a minor antagonist threat in the grand scheme of the film. Really, it's no wonder that she's easy to forget. But while some may see her as a ripoff of a certain Dalmatian coat lover, Madame Medusa from The Rescuers manages to be just a bit more memorable. You know, they say diamonds are a girl's best friend, but Medusa manages to take that to the extreme, being absolutely obsessed with the things and making it her goal to get the devil's eye by any means necessary. Although a bit bumbling with quite a notable temper, Medusa was ultimately cunning and patient enough to successfully kidnap an orphan girl to use in her schemes. She knows how to be manipulative through fake kindness and shame, and overall knows how to use people well, though her willingness to just toss her allies aside after they've served their use could be seen as foolish. When pushed to her limits, Medusa's shown to be truly ruthless, though it's hard to say just how competent she is with a gun, as she seemed to be a fairly poor shot when she tried shooting at Penny. Still, adding a bit of extra power to her arsenal is her access to her sidekick, Mr. Snoops' pet crocodiles, as they're extremely loyal to her and only her, although the end of the film shows that even they have their limits, so again, we must point to Medusa's biggest weakness, that being her own lack of loyalty and her willingness to toss everyone else aside for the sake of her own greed. Hard to really build up power when you can't be bothered to put in the effort. And hey, sometimes you just can't beat the original, and Cruella de Vil can be quite the force to be reckoned with when she wants to be. One of the most notable things about Cruella, outside of that catchy as hell song that is that for the most part, Cruella tends to act purely on impulse. Oh sure, she took her time with that whole puppy kidnapping scheme, but when things start to go wrong, Cruella's prone to extremely reckless behavior, like tearing through the snowy landscape in her car, which ultimately led her to crash, leading to her defeat. Still, despite the fact that a simple car crash was enough to do Cruella in,
Shut up.
we have to still give her some respect. Cruella is extremely wealthy, being a rich heiress who is able to spend all the money she wants on herself and her greatest desires. She also has a couple of henchmen, Horace and Jasper, who are still able to be decent threats even if they mostly come off as incompetent. Beyond that, Cruella's greatest asset just may be her own level of intimidation, being a true devil woman and being able to threaten those who are afraid of her into obeying her. But of course, not everyone is afraid of Cruella, and without any physical power to speak of, save for her previously mentioned henchmen of course, as well as her own tendency to throw things when she gets angry, this is where Cruella tends to fall a bit short. Keeping with the evil ladies of Disney, next is Cinderella's Lady Tremaine. Cold-hearted and incredibly cruel, Tremaine falls into the same category as Cruella, where even if she's not much to worry about physically, she still manages to be incredibly intimidating, and it really is frightening seeing her methodically break down Cinderella's spirit with expert-level precision and nearly succeeding in her efforts. Though she never physically strikes Cinderella, Tremaine is also crafty, going so far as to do things like trapping Cinderella in her room and tripping the Grand Duke in order to break the glass glass slipper. If not for the help of the mice and a bit of extra luck, Tremaine might have gotten away with her cruel crimes. We further see Tremaine's craftiness in the third Cinderella movie, where she's easily able to stay ahead of Cinderella at almost all times, showing once again how she's able to think on her feet and do what she needs to do in order to keep her stepdaughter from her happily ever after.
Stay away from the prince.
Unfortunately for her, this is where our praise of Tremaine ends, as while she's received quite a power boost from getting the magic wand in that third film, it's only temporary. Once she's disarmed, Tremaine is defeated rather quickly. Furthermore, for as intimidating and spirit-breaking as Tremaine can be, both Cinderella and Anastasia are able to escape her in the end, and she isn't able to do a thing about it, so we're unable to place her any higher. Though not nearly as intimidating as the stepmother's evil glare, we'll admit, Frozen's Duke of Weselton does manage to have some notable power. He is a duke, after all, which does grant him some authority that he uses after Elsa runs away. He's also regularly accompanied by 2 bodyguards who are both decently strong in their own right. However, while the Duke has the highest status that we've seen so far in this list due to his title, it ultimately doesn't amount to much. Neither Elsa nor Anna seem to have much respect for him, nor are they too intimidated by him. By the end of the movie, it's declared that Arendelle will no longer trade with Weselton, likely hindering the Duke's kingdom and causing it to lose some of its own strength. The Duke also proves himself to be arrogant, incredibly paranoid, quick to turn on allies, and even quicker when it comes to trying to exploit them, so
the Queen has cursed this land! She must be stopped!
We can't imagine that he, nor Weselton in general, had many allies to begin with. But as crafty as Disney villains can be, sometimes a bit of raw strength can really even the playing field, as seen with our next entry, Pete. Yeah, we might have underestimated Pete a bit, as while he can be seen as a bit of a loser in some instances, he can be a true threat in just as many others. The fact that he can go from being an annoying neighbor in one instance and a true powerhouse in another also shows the versatility of this character. He's been a common thug, a landlord, a musketeer's captain, a businessman, a tyrant, Maleficent's right-hand man, and more. What truly helped Pete stand out as a threat are his sheer size and strength, able to easily tower over as well as overpower characters like Mickey and Goofy. He's even been shown using weapons like swords and guns. You also have to acknowledge just how often Pete has been in a position of financial power over others, occasionally being seen as richer than the other characters. Still, we'll acknowledge that the guy isn't the brightest, and even with all that fat and muscle, it typically doesn't take too much to send him toppling down once the good guys manage to outwit and overpower him. The same could also be said for Peter Pan's Captain Hook, who, unfortunately for him, seems to alternate between being a joke and being an actual threat. For what it's worth, having his own little pirate army does put him a full cut above most of our previously ranked solo villains. Save for his first mate Smee, the rest of his pirates are all fairly competent, at least to the point of being able to successfully overwhelm and capture the Lost Boys and the Darling Children. As for his own personal strengths, although Hook is easily frustrated, he does have his moments where he can be sneaky and almost gentlemanly, which is what helps him briefly trick Tinkerbell into telling him where Peter's hideout was, as well as manipulate Wendy's daughter Jane in the Return to Neverland sequel. You also can't deny that the guy's a decent enough fighter, having the strength to throw a fellow pirate overboard single-handedly, or pry open a crocodile's jaws, and he's also pretty good with a sword, all things considered. It's said that Peter Pan is truly the only other person who's skilled enough to successfully fight him one-on-one. He can also be just as ruthless as any other villain, whether that's towards his enemies or his own men. Still, it is this temper of his that may be Hook's biggest weakness, that and a fear of ticking crocodiles. Because he's so determined and revenge-bound, when things start to go wrong, it can be very easy to get him flustered, leading to him making some foolish decisions. Even so, Hook's ability to be both suave and truly menacing, at least some of the time, is what puts him this high up in our ranking. In all honesty, respect and charm can get you pretty far in the best of circumstances. And Prince Hans proves that in spades. As a young prince with 12 brothers, Hans knew from a young age that he likely wouldn't get any power simply handed to him, meaning that he would have to seek it out himself. Say what you will about how convoluted his whole twist villain thing is, and you'd probably be right.
If only there was someone out there who loved you.
But Hans is implied to be fairly intelligent and very manipulative, being a fantastic liar who's able to keep calm under pressure. Through simply being charming and being able to act like the perfect prince, both Anna and the Kingdom of Arendelle as a whole are able to trust Hans almost immediately. I mean, the guy tells the others that Anna is dead, and they just take his word for it and don't even bother to check. Though, maybe that says more about them than Hans. Anyway, we see him try to further manipulate Elsa, eventually prompting her to give up all hope and nearly killing her with a sword afterwards. This is the most we see from Hans in terms of physical skill, although during an early battle with Elsa, we did also see how strategic he could be with a crossbow. But as successful as Hans is, he can still be just as arrogant as his fellow Disney villains, eventually dooming himself the moment he decided to brag about his grand master plan to Anna. He also can't take a punch, but considering how unnaturally strong Anna seems to be, we won't dock too many points away from him for that. But hey, who needs a prince when you can be king of games? Next up, we have Oogie Boogie. Simply put, Oogie Boogie isn't just hungry for bugs, but power as well. Hence why he's constantly trying to grab more of it through sneaky means as well as through gambling. Although, with the latter, he doesn't seem to be very good at it, usually needing to cheat just to get a win. To his credit, he's strong enough to overpower Sandy Claus long enough to tie him to his roulette wheel, only having the opportunity to do so thanks to his 3 henchmen, Lock, Shock, and Barrel. He also has a small array of death machines, most notable being his gun-wielding slot machines. For as goofy and campy as Oogie Boogie can be, he really isn't one to mess with. But for as much as Oogie may get a thrill out of scaring and hurting others, he himself almost comes off as a bit of a wimp at times, given his tendency to just hide away in his lair while his henchmen do all the work, as well as just how easily he's frightened by people like Jack Skellington. You also can't forget about his biggest weakness, that being the fact that he's just a bunch of bugs clumped together in a sack body. As shown in the film itself, one loose thread and it's all over. Though maybe not as intimidating, Zootopia's Bellwether proved to be about as crafty as our previous entries. Much like Hans, Bellwether uses her approachable appearance and seemingly meek personality to keep others unaware, allowing her to secretly pull the strings. Being the assistant mayor, she has access to a ton of information regarding the city of Zootopia. She's also skilled at leaving clues, using Nick and Judy's investigation to her advantage as a means to frame Mayor Lionheart. We also can't forget about Bellwether's team of rams. Breaking Bad references aside,
alright, Walter and Jesse are back, so I'm leaving now.
These guys are both smart and hardy, being skilled chemists and marksmen while also being strong enough to shake off a fight on an abandoned subway. Along with being manipulative, we have to give Bellwether some extra points in that, in spite of pulling a water noose and bragging about evil plans to someone with a recorder, she did actually try to shoot the heroes herself with what she thought was concentrated night howlers. You gotta respect a villain who's actually smart enough to try and kill the heroes when they can, instead of coming up with some convoluted death trap. All in all, Bellwether proved to be a very manipulative, cruel, and dangerous villain. While we aren't sure how her plan would have worked out long term, it was certainly successful for a time, which in itself is pretty notable. Moving on to another selfish leader, Governor Radcliffe certainly has the firepower to back his prejudice and greed-filled goals. Being a governor, Radcliffe's position of power allows him to get away with pretty much whatever he wants, and all in the pursuit of fame and, above all else, gold! Although it could be argued that he isn't as brilliant as Bellwether, hell, if anything, he's kind of stupid given his stubbornness surrounding gold, he knows how to use tension, paranoia, and racist rhetoric to his advantage. While his own men don't necessarily like him, with only his manservant Wiggins having any real loyalty to him, Radcliffe's air of authority and confidence push his men to continue following him despite their doubts. Along with having a whole army of settlers by his side, Radcliffe does have the means to fight on his own if he absolutely needs to, having a shiny set of armor as well as the skills needed to effectively use a musket. But while he does a good job of manipulating current situations, like the tensions between the settlers and the Native Americans, in his favor, Radcliffe really doesn't plan too far ahead for the most part. This, in combination with his poor treatment of his men, leads to him coming off as incredibly foolish. He may be a strong leader on the surface, but it's still Thomas and the other settlers who remove him from power in the end. But while Radcliffe was just your standard greedy villain, Bill Sikes uses his greed as an excuse to be truly horrible. Though, given his role as a loan shark and the implications that he may just be a full-on crime boss, you really shouldn't be expecting anything different. True to his intimidating and shady demeanor, Sikes isn't all that afraid of getting his hands dirty, being more than willing to kill those who don't give him what he's owed. At one point, he's even heard on the phone talking with an underling about how they're going to torture some poor unknown victim.
What's the last thing you did? You put on the cement shoes?
Through his business, Sikes has both a ton of connections as well as access to quite a bit of information, such as the Foxworth Estate's phone number, allowing him to more easily demand ransom from the wealthiest members of the city. As an added show of force, Sikes also has 2 guard dogs, Dobermans, Roscoe, and DeSoto. He's also constantly armed with a handgun, which we see him nearly use when some of the dogs disguise themselves as a pizza delivery guy. You also can't ignore Sikes' durability, given that he was able to easily shake off punching through a car window. Through all of this, in spite of just being an ordinary guy, Sikes manages to still come off as an almost unstoppable force, to the point where it takes getting hit by a subway train to get him off Oliver and Company's tails once and for all. Keeping with the wealth-obsessed villains, it's time to take a look at Prince John. Let's be honest here, the thing that puts John this high up really is his status as a prince. Being a royal, he almost comes off as untouchable in that for whoever tries to get in his way, he can simply arrest them or sentence them to death. Still, to this spoiled prince's credit, he was clever enough to usurp the throne from his brother, King Richard, with the help of his hypnotizing assistant, violence or hiss. He rules using a fun mix of fear and taxes, driving his citizens into a state of poverty and despair. However, John himself is quite a bit of a coward with a hair-trigger temper. He's constantly outwitted by Robin Hood, and while Robin Hood may be one of the few people who are able to constantly and successfully trick him, John's still got a whole army of soldiers at his side that can't be underestimated. Although not a complete dummy, whenever this prince is on his lonesome and without his guards or his hench Snake, he always shows just how easy it is to disarm him. He may be a royal, but his personal power is somewhat lacking. So if you need a villain who's just a bit more impressive, how about the world's greatest criminal mind? Or you can just call him Professor Ratigan for short. Distinguished with a not-so-hidden temper, this Vincent Price-voiced rat has many different sides to him. On the one hand, he's Basil's intellectual equal, actually being able to stay one step ahead of him for most of the film and even breaking the detective's spirit at one point. Additionally, while the robot queen idea was a bit goofy, you can't deny how successful it nearly was in giving Ratigan a position of power in mouse society. It's also implied that he's been able to avoid being arrested on several occasions, getting away with his crimes and further earning himself the title of being Basil's one and only rival. On the other side of things, you have to acknowledge that what truly makes Ratigan scary is that he has both brain and brawn on his side. He's got a whole gang's worth of mice and other creatures who are loyal to him, not to mention a cat that he's able to use as a means to keep others in line. He even nearly feeds the queen herself to his dear Felicia, but even when left without any backup, when pushed into a corner, Ratigan completely pushes aside his distinguished side and relies fully on his rat strength, his impressive speed, and his incredibly sharp claws. In all honesty, out of all of our villains so far, Ratigan came the closest to winning. The only thing we can really knock him for is just leaving Basil and Dawson in a death trap, giving them the opportunity to escape instead of just killing them himself.
Oh, this is wicked.
So maybe he's just a bit egotistical to the point of it being detrimental. It's also shown that Basil is just a bit more clever than him, especially when Ratigan himself becomes blinded with rage. Still, these couple mistakes don't take away from just how powerful this brilliant and devious rat manages to be. Although, if you want a villain who seems to get away with his crimes scot-free, look no further than the coachman from Pinocchio. This guy. Oof. Possibly one of the darkest villains in the Disney canon, the Coachman is known for using his seemingly endless supply of resources, namely his own private island that's filled with games, cigars, and beer, to trick naughty little boys into literally making jackasses of themselves. From there, he's able to further finance his efforts by using these new donkeys as labor in his salt mines or as products he can sell on the black market.
And what might your name be?
Truly the stuff of nightmares, especially given that he got away with it for so long. It's the Coachman's wealth and sneakiness, only allowing rumors of his pleasure island to spread to children, that make him so damn scary. So why can't we put him any higher? Well, as successful as the Coachman is, his power can still be taken away in the right circumstances. For example, if a certain former puppet boy and his father decided to call the cops after they finished celebrating, because he's not a royal like Prince John, we feel that there's no way the Coachman would be able to get away with all his crimes once someone actually manages to squeal on him. Additionally, while his face is certainly intimidating and he knows how to use a whip, he isn't much of a physical force either, which is probably why he had to go after gullible little kids who, even if they weren't turned into donkeys, would still be too small to stand up to him. Another villain who works best from the shadows, and who's just as skilled at it, if not more so, is Mother Gothel. Gothel's only desire is to remain young and essentially immortal, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to keep hold of her magic flower, from kidnapping all the way to straight up murder.
Now look what you've done, Rapunzel.
Gothel is one of the sneakiest villains we've discussed so far, being able to get away with her crime for well over a decade thanks to her careful planning and hiding. While it could be argued that her unwillingness to humor her so-called daughter when it came to the floating lights is what led to her demise, Gothel is still a master manipulator and gaslighter. Gothel's also a great tracker, being able to find and follow Rapunzel and Eugene fairly easily while also simply being a lot stronger than she looks, arming herself with knives and other weapons. This, combined with her skills at sneakiness, allow her to take out stronger enemies like the Stabbington brothers, as well as Eugene when he tries to rescue Rapunzel. Gothel's also willing to compromise and let Rapunzel save Eugene in order to assure a promise that Rapunzel would never try to escape, once again showing her ability to plan ahead for the sake of her goals. Really, the only mistake Gothel makes is underestimating Eugene's love and willingness to die for his true love. Getting back to the Disney villain royals, it's time to bow down to the Queen of Hearts. Much like with Prince John, it's the Queen's royal status that gets her this far. Though, that's not to say she should be totally underestimated. If anything, she's much more impressive and intimidating than John, even if she is a bit of a blowhard, given that her catchphrase is literally, "Off with their head!"
Ah! With their heads!
it's safe to say that she's a pretty violent person. As a queen, she's got the power of a royal as well as a full deck of card guards at her disposal, each of them armed with axes. Still, they're just cards with human heads and limbs attached, so not necessarily the most intimidating or undefeatable type of guard out there. As for herself, between her huge temper, her enormous ego, and her childishness that comes out whenever she doesn't get her way, the Queen of Hearts actually manages to come off as more fragile than she looks, both emotionally and mentally. As such, you have to wonder just how well she'd do if she didn't have a means of decapitating anyone and everyone who ever upset her. We've finally arrived at our most recent Wicked Royal, King Magnifico from Wish. As his name implies, Magnifico has some pretty magnificent magic powers. Namely, he's able to grant wishes. Although, because we only see him grant 2 wishes, it's hard to say if he has any limits when it comes to these wishes. He's able to do other forms of magic, such as levitation and potions, and we later learn that he has access to a book that gives its user dark magic powers. While these powers do corrupt, they also allow for great strength and even stronger spells like magic hands and disguise magic. We should also talk about Magnifico's status as Rosas's beloved king, making it easy for others to believe that everything he does is for their own good. He's also able to twist people's wishes to his own gain, like when he took Simon's wish of being a knight and turned him into a brainwashed servant who was willing to go after his own friends.
Find them so they may pay for their betrayal.
But for as powerful as Magnifico is, you could argue that his paranoia and hunger for power are his biggest weaknesses, given that they lead to him corrupting himself. Additionally, any villain that can be defeated by a group song or by the power of wishes and the community can't be that powerful in comparison to a wishing star. Moving along, we have the first of our hunters, that being Clayton from Tarzan. Self-described survivalist, Clayton's much more than just his hunter persona. Sure, his skills with a shotgun and a machete are fairly impressive, but it's his deviousness that helps him stand out as more than just a cliche. He proves to be a good planner, having the hindsight to hire men who would be perfectly fine with capturing and killing gorillas, and is also shown to be a pretty decent manipulator as well when we see him use Tarzan's affections for Jane against him. He may be a bit on the arrogant side, but he always makes sure to give himself an advantage that's worthy of bragging about. Clayton's sheer strength also can't be ignored, though when it comes to one-on-one fights, he tends to lean more on the cowardly side of things, choosing to use his gun for as long as possible instead of fighting fair. But like many other villains, he ends up being blinded by his temper, to the point of accidentally hanging himself when he refuses to listen to Tarzan's warning. Happens every time. Similarly, Rourke from Atlantis: The Lost Empire follows a very similar arc of manipulation and betrayal for the sake of greed. It should be noted that unlike Clayton and another certain hunter who we'll be talking about very soon, Rourke actually has some concrete status, being an army commander as well as a mercenary.
I prefer the term adventure capitalist.
This gives him more of an air of authority than if he were simply a brute, leading the other characters to continuing to trust him up until it's almost too late. He also proves to be more competent than other leaders on this list, like Governor Radcliffe. Further adding to Rourke's fame is his talent for leading expeditions, as well as his skills with a variety of weapons such as guns, knives, and axes. He's also a total manipulator, being incredibly analytical as well as being able to still scheme while under pressure, add in a willingness to play dirty, and disregard emotional baggage thanks to his pragmatic attitude, and it's no surprise that Rourke was able to get so far in his career. Now, while Clayton and Rourke may have been pretty good villains, we'd say that Gaston still outshines them in terms of power. It could be argued that Clayton is slightly smarter than Gaston, but as someone who can take down multiple grown men and lift a bench with 3 women on it using only one hand, there's no denying who's stronger. Gaston is also skilled with his gun as well as a variety of melee weapons such as clubs or arrows. He can be a bit cowardly and also isn't afraid to be a dirty fighter, but you can't deny that the man gets results. What truly gives Gaston the advantage, however, is the power he has over the townspeople. Anyone can have power over people that they literally hired for a job, but Gaston? Thanks to his outward shows of charm and strength, all it takes is a few words of authority for him to get a full-on mob of people by his side.
I say we kill the beast!
In a sense, Gaston is the peak version of Hans, relying on looks, shows of strength and competence, and his reputation to essentially get all the respect and power he needs to effortlessly rule over others. And Gaston does all this without an actual crown or even a title to his infamous name, just muscles and handsomeness. Additionally, when it comes to people like Belle who aren't simply won over by his charm, Gaston still has ways of manipulating them. Remember, if not for getting distracted by the beast, Gaston would have likely gone away with sending Maurice to an asylum, the townspeople likely still seeing him as being in the right for it. Sure, he may not be able to take on the beast when Beast is actually fighting back, but one failure certainly doesn't take away from all his successes. From firearms wielders to fantastical magic, Madame Mim manages to be silly yet skilled in her transformation abilities. An old rival of Merlin himself, Mim is a dark magic user who manages to be skilled in a variety of transformations, giving herself the ability to turn into any form or beast she needs, including dragon. She's incredibly durable, with her skull being able to withstand stand being crushed with a giant rock, and she can also teleport and fly on her broomstick, giving her the ability for a quick escape if she ever needs one. Her durability? It can't be understated that even if she's not the most powerful witch out there, her powers are still strong enough to allow her to go toe-to-toe with Merlin, with her willingness to cheat also giving her an advantage. But as limitless as this magic may seem, ironically enough, it's Mim's overconfidence that causes her to lose in the end. Additionally, it's implied that Merlin's magic is more inherently powerful because it's good instead of evil. This is demonstrated with his most powerful move, that being his transformation into a germ that makes Mim sick for several weeks. So much for the power of evil, huh? In that sense, perhaps transformation potions are more effective, or at least that seems to be Yzma's mindset. Being the advisor to the throne for several decades, Yzma is respected by the people of the kingdom, being seen as more competent and easier to deal with than Kuzco despite her cruelty towards peasants. When Kuzco seemingly dies, it's incredibly easy for her to take over the kingdom, with the palace guards showing their loyalty to the point of sacrificing their lives for her in the attempts to capture Kuzco and Pacha.
Hey, I've been turned into a cow. Can I go home?
Speaking of Yzma's hired help, you can't forget about Kronk. Though given his eventual attempt at betrayal and overall incompetence, it's hard to say whether he's more of an advantage or a hindrance for her. What is a true advantage within her arsenal, however, is Yzma's collection of potions and poisons. Whether or not she uses them effectively is a different argument entirely, but on their own, there's still a strong enough source of power to give Yzma a fighting chance, even if she doesn't have much of a physical advantage. Add in her chaotic cleverness and absolutely insane durability for a woman of her age and build, and you've got yourself a pretty powerful and certainly memorable baddie. From someone who uses potions to a guy who truly knows how to use stolen tech. Next is Robert Callahan, aka Yokai. Okay, so he's not as fun nor as cool as Yzma, according to some, being a very typical story of someone who could have had a pretty alright life if not for getting blinded by revenge. And that was his mistake! Memes aside, it can't be denied that Callahan is very intelligent, coming up with a pretty flawless plan when it came to stealing Hiro's microbots and using them in an incredibly effective way. With his new heartless persona comes a willingness to do whatever he needs to in order to succeed in his revenge scheme, and we see Yokai use his microbots in different ways, knowing exactly how to capture each of Hiro's teammates, albeit temporarily. But in all honesty, as powerful as the microbots are, Callahan's biggest strength is also his biggest weakness. Once a certain amount of microbots are destroyed or lost, we see Callahan left without any sort of defense, leading to a very easy defeat. Really, you'd think a guy as seemingly smart as him would have caught on to Hiro's final plan a little more quickly. But for those who want a more traditional example of being a one-man, or rather one-woman army, look no further than Namari from Raya and the Last Dragon. Now, yes, we know Namari had a redemption of sorts, and technically isn't a villain. However, she played enough of an antagonist role that we feel she counts for this ranking. First thing to account for is her status as the princess of Kumandra's Fang, which is one of the more powerful kingdoms in the land. As princess, she has access to her kingdom's soldiers, which she uses in her travels to find and capture Raya. Unlike most other villains, Namari doesn't rule by fear, and is instead loved by her citizens, especially the kingdom's children, further solidifying her power as a royal. Fang is also known for its giant cats, which Namari also knows how to use. As for her own strengths, Namari is an incredibly skilled fighter, being skilled in weapons such as dual swords and crossbows. She's also shown to be fairly brilliant and calculating, making her the complete rival package for Raya and her crew. If not for the fact that she becomes a hero by the end of the film, being forced to work with Raya and the others to help save the world, Namari might have had a top spot on our list. But why be clever or intimidating when you can straight up just break the rules, as demonstrated by King Candy, aka Turbo. Often seen as the best of the modern Disney twist villains, it's really not hard to see why. Really, the fact that Turbo had the skills and talents to hack into another game and essentially give himself a free pass to do whatever he wanted is the most impressive thing about him. With just a bit of hacking, Turbo gives himself unquestioned authority and loyalty from his brainwashed subjects. But even outside of Sugar Rush's main code, Turbo has plenty of his own skills. Even if he's a bit on the short side, the guy's a master driver and knows how to fight to his advantage. He's an incredibly cunning manipulator, able to get Ralph temporarily on his side fairly easily, and as for his Cybug form, well, just look at it.
Get back here, little guy!
If not for a very explosive death, it's reasonable to think that Turbo could have very well taken over the entire arcade. But hey, every video game boss has got to have their weak point. Sticking with our tech-based villains, it's finally time to rank Doris from Meet the Robinsons. Yes, some of you have noted that she was missing from our previous ranking, and as it turns out, she's a bit more powerful than we once thought. Though she may look like a harmless bowler hat, Doris is armed with sharp mechanical arms and killer blades. She's able to take over the mind of anyone who wears her, even animals and dinosaurs, and even when she's not outright controlling controlling people, her relationship with the adult Goob shows how cunning she can be at manipulation.
Together, we made the perfect team.
What puts her this high up is the sheer fact that in an alternate timeline where she had the ability to make more of herself, she was able to take over the world and turn all of humanity into her puppets. However, much like with someone like Callahan, Doris's one big weakness sort of overshadows all of her strengths. She may have the ability to take over the world, but she still needs to actually be worn by someone in a position of power first, thus giving her the means to manufacture a whole line of Doris hats and get enough humans to wear them before enacting her grand plan. While she can still defend herself in instances of danger, her goals of taking over the world are so heavily dependent on others that we're unable to place her any higher. Sci-fi villains really are out of this world, and Captain Gantu manages to be a pretty impressive force all on his own. Ignoring his eventual discharge, Gantu's position as captain of the Galactic Federation granted him much respect and authority. He's incredibly brutish, and while his lack of being a brilliant strategist or manipulator may be seen as a fault, it's undeniable that Gantu's true power lies in his sheer size and strength. All we can say is that it's a good thing Stitch is indestructible. Otherwise, their fight could have gotten messy. It's also worth noting that Gantu is a skilled pilot and can effectively use both plasma blasters and net cannons. Honestly, the guy's only real weakness is that he can be a bit arrogant and impulsive, although not nearly to the point of it being outright destructive or detrimental like with other villains we've talked about. Keeping with the alien theme for now, Treasure Planet's Scroop may not be a giant shark man, but he's still just as intimidating as one, perhaps even more so. Unlike Silver, who has a more subtle evil side to him and thus doesn't care for unnecessary bloodshed, Scroop is shown to never hesitate when it comes to taking out those who stand in his way, whether that be innocent bystanders like Mr. Arrow or his own captain. In addition to being incredibly sneaky as well as a great liar, Scroop's alien abilities allow him to climb on the walls and ceiling of any area, giving him an aerial advantage in a fight. He's also shown being stealthy, strong, and an overall skilled fighter. He's still able to be tricked by Jim in the end, but Scroop still had him on the ropes for a good long while and likely would have won the fight at several points if not for the interference of Morph and a bit of extra luck on Jim's side. Okay, now we're getting into the big leagues, and who better to start us off than Judge Frollo. Frollo serves as a powerful Parisian justice minister, using his position of power as a means to purge whom he considers to be sinners, namely the Romani people, like Esmeralda. Although he's only a judge, he's still able to sentence people to imprisonment and death without much argument, as well as command soldiers to do his bidding as if he were a king, further adding to his authority.
The sentence for insubordination is death.
Although not physically powerful, he's still strong enough to kill Quasimodo's mother as well as restrain Esmeralda, and we also see him use daggers and swords to try and slay people with his own hands. Speaking of Quasimodo, Frollo's level of manipulation and gaslighting when it comes to his surrogate parenting overshadows even that of Mother Gothel's, and even when Quasi tries to fight back against him, Frollo still uses Quasi as a means to find the Court of Miracles. Really, his only weaknesses are that he has no authority inside the church, although even this falls by the wayside by the film's climax, and that Quasi is physically stronger than him, even if it takes a while for Frollo to truly understand this. For our next ranking, we have Disney's most notable big cat buddies, those being Shere Khan and Scar. In terms of power, these two are incredibly similar. They're both big cats who have claws and fangs, but still tend to rely more on their talents for manipulation and intimidation in their attempts to gain power. Shere Khan is also seen as the most vicious predator in the jungle, seemingly having more physical strength than Scar. However, Scar does have his own army of hyenas who, outside of the film's final confrontation, manage to remain loyal to him in spite of his cruelty. Ultimately, both Scar and Shere Khan have their own fears, with Scar fearing Mufasa, hence why he had to trick his brother and catch him at a moment of weakness in order to have a chance at killing him, and Shere Khan fearing fire. We feel that in terms of power, they both have fairly equal footing with each other, being skilled and intimidating in their own unique yet still similar ways. Managing to be even more wicked than these cats is the one and only Evil Queen. As her quote-unquote name implies, the Evil Queen is a powerful monarch, though outside of her magic mirror and a lone huntsman, we don't exactly see many instances of her commanding others. Perhaps that's why her own powers remained so noteworthy over the years. As a magic user, the Queen's able to disguise herself as an old hag, prompting Snow White to let her guard down. We also can't forget her infamous poison apples, with their only cure being true love's kiss. While this is ultimately another case of a Disney villain getting a bit of a power boost from their status, even if we don't really see much of her ruling her kingdom, the Evil Queen's tenacity and cursed abilities allow her to be a force to be reckoned with. It's too bad her jealousy and a fall off a cliff were still enough to do her in. But while the Evil Queen may have been seeking adoration, it's safe to say that Dr. Facilier did his best work from the shadows. While it would have been easy to simply claim that Dr. Facilier was only powerful because of his connections to his friends from the other side, it's made clear that Facilier is incredibly powerful in his own right, and what's more, he knows how to use these powers effectively. Being a master in voodoo, he's able to cast spells, create illusions, and control shadows and darkness in order to give himself his own little army to do his bidding.
Now we're cooking. We're gonna find ourselves a frog.
Keep in mind, these shadows themselves are also pretty powerful, only being stopped by powerful sources of light, like Mama Odie's magic or Ray's light. But much like other villains, Dr. Facilier's most powerful ability is his talent for manipulation. While it didn't work on Tiana, he was still able to trick and manipulate Lawrence and Naveen. Unfortunately, all this power couldn't save him when he was unable to repay his debt, so while he may have been a voodoo master, he was still just immortal in the end. From the bayou to the sea, next up we have Ursula. Like Facilier, Ursula's prime source of power comes from her magic, namely her potions and her curses, as well as her unbreakable deals. While it may take a bit more effort and time, some of these spells are nearly as powerful as the ones from Triton's trident, namely the ones that involve transformation. Speaking of which, once she gets her hands on that trident, she shows her true potential as a sorceress of the sea. But while this may be a temporary power-up, what isn't temporary are Ursula's own physical attributes that allow her to still be a force to be reckoned with, even without her magic. This includes her large physique, her many strong tentacles, and her pair of electric eels. Add in the fact that Ursula is able to easily spy on others, allowing her to stay one step ahead, and it's really no wonder why Triton considered Ursula to be such a threat. While maybe not as powerful as we once thought, the Horned King still manages to be a pretty notable threat within the Disney canon. Yet another spellcaster, the Horned King is a pretty notable one, even if the movie he's from is often forgotten by most people. Included in his array of powerful magical abilities is the ability to control an army of deathless warriors, as well as the ability to use the Black Cauldron, which can revive the dead.
Arise, my messengers of death.
We can't deny that these are some pretty powerful abilities, ones that could easily be a permanent game changer in a fight when used right. We also briefly see him teleport 1 or 2 times. He's also fairly strong as we see him fight Taran in the film's climax. However, given that the Horned King is essentially just a corpse, he ends up not being very durable and is torn apart by his own Black Cauldron.
He's gone. He's gone.
It may be his own source of power, which in itself is a notable weakness, as we don't know how powerful he is without it, but the fact that he himself can't resist its destructive power is a sign that maybe the Horned King is weaker than we initially thought. We've finally come to the last of our purely human villains, and there's no one better to top this category than Mulan's Shan Yu. Sure, Shan Yu may not have supernatural magic nor technology by his side, but he's one heck of a soldier. As the leader of the Huns, Shan Yu at one point had hundreds, perhaps even thousands of soldiers who were completely and utterly loyal to him and their cause no matter what. Both Shan Yu and his men are incredibly skilled, being armed with swords, knives, bows, and more. Shan Yu also has a trusty falcon that helps him track and spy on enemies, and he himself is almost unnaturally strong, being able to break through wooden roofs and tip over large pillars like they're nothing. Shan Yu is also a great strategist, as we see when he and his men are able to sneak into the parade with their dragon disguise. But what really impressed us is just Shan Yu's sheer durability. The guy, and even a few of his soldiers, were able to survive getting buried under several feet of snow. Certainly nothing to sneeze at, given how fatal that avalanche was for everyone else. Too bad Shan Yu wasn't also fireworks proof. Entering our top 5, let's talk about the second most famous crab in Disney history, Tamatoa. We've got to hand it to this guy. He's certainly made the most of his limited screen time. Thanks to his monstrous size, Tamatoa is seen as pretty undefeatable by most mortals.
That's my grandma.
That's my grandma's. I ate my grandma.
Even a demigod like Maui struggles to defeat him when he's without the transformation powers of his magic hook. Simply put, this guy's all about style and strength, with his hard gold-covered shell being just as tough and dangerous as his huge claws. If someone tries to fight him without any sort of backup plan or powerful weapon, there's no doubt they're likely going to be crushed. However, Tamatoa is very easy to trick, as we see Moana do twice, and what's more, his giant size actually ends up being a detriment when Moana figures out a way to knock him off his feet.
Hey! Did you like the song?
But hey, at least his song was catchy. Moving on, we have the most infamous royal advisor in the animated world, Jafar. A wicked sorcerer and vizier, Jafar is all about gaining as much power as possible. As a seer, he's able to spy on others and locate other sources of power, such as the magic lamp. Jafar is also able to hypnotize people using his magic staff, assuring that anyone who didn't already respect him would still bow to his authority. But of course, Jafar's main power comes from his wishes, which eventually turn him into an all-powerful genie. Obviously, being a genie has one big weakness, but as we saw in The Return of Jafar, even when he's being forced to serve a master, Jafar has quite a bit of wiggle room regarding his powers and how he's able to use them against his enemies. But even when he's in a situation where he's seemingly rendered powerless, Jafar's sneakiness and overall cleverness still managed to keep him a step ahead of most people, even if a certain street rat was still able to trick him in the end. Honestly, there's a reason why he seems to be the de facto leader when it comes to Disney villain stuff. Well, him and one other certain villainess. We've now come to the true representatives of evil, starting with the
wicked mistress herself, Maleficent. Being our final true spellcaster of the lot, Maleficent primarily uses dark magic, curses, and shapeshifting to give herself an advantage over other fairies and magic users in the kingdom. She literally describes her power set as all the powers of hell, and with how cruel she is, we never see her hold back regarding her powers. She can create huge thorn forests that are nearly impossible to get through, and Merryweather implies that Maleficent is able to control the weather and create forces like deadly frost storms. Even trickery seems to be worthless against her, given how even after the good fairies tried their best to protect Aurora, Maleficent was still able to lure her to a spinning wheel. Though she comes off as an unstoppable force in her own right, she's still got plenty of backup thanks to her pig soldiers and her loyal raven Diablo. Finally, you simply can't forget about her deadly dragon form with its bright green flames that are hot enough to melt bricks. Looking at all of this, it almost feels like a cop-out that she's able to be defeated by a purified, enchanted sword, but if she truly is the embodiment of evil, then we suppose if she had to be defeated by only one thing, it would make sense for it to be concentrated goodness. Getting our silver medal of power, we have Fantasia's Chernabog. Now, considering this is a bit of a shakeup from last time, we're sure some of you are confused, but just hear us out. Though not much of a character in his own right, Chernabog is seen as both Satan and as a raw embodiment of evil, being more a force of nature than anything else. He's able to summon spirits, demons, and fire, although we don't actually see him do anything with these things, only really summoning them because it's just what he does. Heck, he even throws his own minions and demons into the fires of Bald Mountain for fun, so it's not as though he's summoning an army for any specific reason. What's more, while it's implied that Chernabog is immortal due to being, Satan, he still cowers at things like sunlight and church hymns. If those are his weaknesses, can he really be all-powerful? In all honesty, Chernabog's power seems to rely on the audience's interpretation of him more than anything else. And for us, there's one other immortal character in the Disney canon who manages to pose much more of a threat. Finally, our gold medal of power goes to Hades, Lord of the Dead.
Name is Hades, Lord of the Dead. Hi, how you doing?
Yes, we're going with Hades this time around, as he is a literal god. Like any god, he has a wide variety of supernatural abilities, from magic and hellfire to having the ability to make unbreakable deals. Although he can still be hurt or temporarily imprisoned, Hades is still immortal as well as highly durable, and thus can never truly be defeated. He knows how to work from the shadows and was incredibly close to changing his destiny, even if his two henchmen and Meg ultimately got in the way. Described as a sort of fast-talking car salesman, Hades knows how to think on his feet in spite of his fiery temper, which he actually has pretty decent control over, while also having the abilities to put any plan he needs to into action. Speaking of those abilities, the fact that he seems to be the only one able to completely control the Titans, those huge, nearly unstoppable forces of nature, speaks to just how powerful Hades can be when given the opportunity. For all these reasons, we feel that Hades just needs to be on top this time around. But hey, maybe we'll change our mind later on, or maybe a future Disney villain will actually be able to top him. For now though, there's no one more powerful in the Disney canon, in our opinion, than Hades.